The IV drip, that steady, relentless pulse in the quiet of my hospital room, began to shift in my mind. It was no longer a harsh reminder of my fragility, but a gentle, rhythmic patter, the sound of rain on a rooftop. Not the hospital's sterile, flat roof, but ours. The little Cape-style house on Maple Street where the gutters always choked with oak leaves every October, no matter how many times I cleaned them. Where the dryer rattled like it had marbles stuck in its lungs, a sound Ellen used to joke was the house humming to itself. Where I, Arthur Miller, the man who could fix anything with a wrench and a roll of duct tape, found myself utterly helpless to mend the one thing that truly mattered. The smell of antiseptic thinned, dissolving into the air. In my head, I could almost taste dish soap and hot coffee, feel the slick coolness of the linoleum floor that never quite looked clean no matter how hard Ellen scrubbed it. Memory, I've learned, isn't a straight road you follow from point A to point B. It's a series of doors, each with a handle that opens when you touch it without meaning, to a sudden gust of the past blowing into the present. The handle I just touched was that sound, steady water, steady time, steady proof that I was still here, still breathing long enough to walk back to where I started losing my son. Maple Street was never fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a yard big enough to teach a boy to throw a football, small enough that mowing it counted as a chore he could finish before sunset. I was 28 when Ellen and I signed that mortgage. A private, newly turned civilian from the motor pool with a tan line where my watch used to sit and a toolbox I could carry all day. Ellen worked the front desk at Dr. Hargrave's clinic. She knew every kid's rash and every grandmother's blood pressure in a 3-mile radius. The nurses adored her. The old men flirted, and she'd just roll her eyes, drawing a little heart in the corner of her sticky notes when she thought no one was looking. We didn't need much back then. Just a car that started, a roof that held, and a Sunday with no calls from dispatch. When Matthew came, the house changed size. Same square footage, a different universe. The walk from his crib to the kitchen sink felt like a march across a county line. The budget grew teeth, snapping at every dollar. We took a red Sharpie to the calendar and circled due dates, not just for bills, but for first steps, first words, first anything. We bought a second-hand stroller that scuffed our shins on every uneven crack in the sidewalk, and a crib whose instructions looked like a foreign language, all diagrams and inscrutable symbols, except for the last step, tighten all fasteners. I knew that part on instinct. There are days I will keep like coins burnished bright in the pocket of my mind. One of them was a Tuesday in March when Matthew was 5 years old. The old fan in the kitchen squeaked a complaining rhythm as it spun. The radio played a song from before any of us had gray hair, a crooning melody of simpler times. Outside the window, the rain came down the way it does when spring and winter are arguing, a soft, insistent drumming. I just kicked off my muddy boots by the back door when Ellen handed me a steaming mug of coffee, her fingers brushing mine, a small spark of warmth. She kissed me then, her lips soft against mine, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, that familiar gesture she always made. Matthew sat on the linoleum floor, surrounded by a rainbow explosion of crayons and a pristine white index card. I remember kneeling beside him, my voice soft. "What's that, buddy?" I asked, looking at the earnest scrawl. He looked up, his eyes bright with the seriousness of a child with a grand plan. "A list," he announced proudly. Of what I prompted, a smile playing on my lips. What I want to be. Football player, astronaut, dinosaur. Ellen, leaning against the counter, laughed so hard she snorted a joyful, uninhibited sound. 2 out of 3 isn't bad, she managed to gasp, wiping a tear from her eye. I keep that laugh like a photo I never took, a perfect capture of pure, uncomplicated joy. We weren't a family that argued loudly. I was raised by a man who believed silence was how you kept the peace. A quiet conviction that any disagreement could be suffocated by unspoken resentment. My mother, God rest her soul, believed casseroles fixed all arguments, a warm, cheesy balm for any emotional wound. But life, I've learned, doesn't care about your family rules, your quiet traditions, or your culinary diplomacy. Life is a contractor with a clipboard, perpetually marking down change orders you didn't ask for, didn't want, and certainly couldn't afford. The first change order was subtle, a whisper rather than a shout. Ellen started getting tired. Everyone gets tired, of course, the relentless demands of work, parenting, and simply existing. But this was a different kind of tired. A weariness that felt like a curtain slowly lowering over her vibrant spirit. She'd come home from the clinic and sit in her car for 10 minutes, sometimes longer, before coming in, her eyes closed, hands resting on the steering wheel as if drawing strength from the worn plastic. Long day, I'd ask, trying to sound casual, trying to ignore the flicker of unease in my gut. "Just old bones, Art," she'd say, and she'd offer a smile, a brave, paper-thin facade like a cut you don't want your kid to see lest it cause them worry. I told myself it was nothing. A good husband, I reasoned, carries the heavy things, so I carried denial like a heavy bag of salt through a long, bitter February. The second change order was louder, shattering the quiet of a Sunday afternoon. Ellen fainted at the kitchen sink. Matthew was 7. The coffee mug in her hand shattered on the linoleum shards, skittering across the floor. I caught her before she hit the tile, her body limp and surprisingly cold in my arms. The ER, that familiar scent of bleach and bad news, was a grim reminder of life's fragility. Dr. Hargrave, his white hair wild around his head, his eyes gentler than I wanted them to be, came to the bay himself. He told us they'd found something, and the world went to a high, ringing silence for a while, a deafening echo in my ears. We didn't have the language for cancer then, not really. So we borrowed it quickly, grasping at the cold clinical terms: stages, cells, margins, options. On the way home, Ellen looked at me, her face pale but her eyes clear and steady. She told me I didn't have to be a hero just to be there. I remember looking at her, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white, and telling her I wasn't going anywhere. And I meant it with every fiber of my being. We tried to keep Matthew's life as soft as possible, a fragile bubble against the harsh realities encroaching on our world. I took every overtime shift I could get with the county maintenance department, patching potholes in April, fixing boilers that coughed their last breath every first cold snap. I learned the schedules of school buses and chemo chairs, the precise timing required to navigate 2 demanding worlds. I learned to stretch ground beef into 3 dinners, making it taste like something it wasn't, and to act like I didn't see the envelope from the radiation bill. When I put the mail on the kitchen table, pretending its contents didn't scream our financial desperation. Matthew, in turn, learned to tie his shoes without looking to do his homework at the kitchen counter, while his mother napped just 10 feet away, her breathing shallow and ragged. He also learned something else, something I didn't see then, a subtle, insidious lesson that would shape the man he became. He learned that I would always cover the shortfall, always quiet the noise, always fill the gaps between what we had and what was needed. It looked like love because it was. It also looked like training. Training in the subtle art of expectation without reciprocation. There's a memory I've never said out loud, a small significant detail that now in the stark clarity of this hospital bed feels like a prophecy. Matthew hiding behind the pantry door at 9 years old, his fingers deep in the sugar jar, his eyes guilty and bright. I remember asking him, my voice soft but firm, what he was doing. He'd replied, nothing, his lip dusted with telltale crystals. I'd told him his nothing was sweet and to close the jar and rinse his mouth. He'd looked at me for a second, testing the fence, that subtle, almost imperceptible challenge. Then he closed it, rinsed, and hugged me a tight, desperate embrace, as if the punishment he'd escaped needed a place to go, a space to be absorbed by my unwavering presence. It was nothing. It was everything. The year I turned 43, Ellen stopped making lists. People often forget that dying happens long before it looks like it. She left sticky notes in places, small, poignant messages, like she knew she wouldn't be there to answer the questions they posed. Matthew's socks in top drawer. Trash day Wednesday. Call insurance about referral. Don't forget to eat. That last one in her familiar looping handwriting made me angry in a way I couldn't confess angry at the universe for using my wife's hand to tell me how to be alive without her. She passed in a room where the blinds were drawn just enough to show slices of the late afternoon sky, painting the wall with strips of pale light. It was quiet. That's how she would have wanted it. My strongest memory from that day is walking out to the hospital parking lot with a plastic bag of her belongings, a silk scarf, a watch with a cracked face, 3 hair ties, and a paperback novel she never finished. The sun was bright, and stupid birds were arguing on a wire. The ordinary world kept running rude and right while mine went off the road into the trees. Matthew was 11, a thin, gangly boy whose grief was too big for his small frame. He stared at the bag like it was a joke. Nobody should tell a cruel trick. Grief, I've learned, turns your house into a museum. Every object, every chipped mug, every worn armchair becomes a plaque for something you can't read without crying. I did what men like me do. I fixed what I could see. I replaced the kitchen faucet that had been dripping for months, recaulked the tub, repainted the railing on the porch. And I held my boy when he had a fever at 2 a.m, his small body shaking, and then went to work the next day like my own body didn't feel like it had a hole where its center should be. When Matthew started middle school, I took the morning shift at the county, meaning I was home to make him dinner. Spaghetti on Mondays, eggs and fried potatoes on Thursdays, pizza on Fridays if the overtime check wasn't already spoken for. We didn't speak much about Ellen. Neither of us could figure out how to say her name without breaking open. without letting the dam of our collective sorrow burst. If you asked me when Matthew started slipping away, I would tell you it was gradual, like a hidden leak behind drywall. The paint looks fine. The studs rot silently, invisibly, until the entire structure is compromised. 8th grade brought a new crowd. A boy named Trey, whose father sold cars and whose mother wore sunglasses at night, even indoors sometimes. They're just friends, I told myself when they pushed each other around in our driveway, laughing, saying bro like it was a benediction, a sacred word. The first time I smelled vape in Matthew's room, a sickly sweet scent clinging to his clothes, I changed the subject with myself, hoping it was a one-time thing. The second time I had a conversation. You want to be the guy who wastes his wind before the climb, I asked. My voice laced with a concern I struggled to hide. He just shrugged that infuriating, dismissive gesture. Everyone does it, Dad. Everyone doesn't have me, I'd replied, meaning it as a promise, a warning, a declaration of unwavering support, not realizing then how easily it could be read as a contract, an open-ended commitment to fix all his problems. We built our lives around small wins, a B+ in algebra, a clean room without prompting a Saturday where the lawnmower started on the first pull. We also collected small losses, a lie about where he'd been after school, a voicemail from a teacher asking about a missed assignment, $20 missing from my wallet that I pretended I'd forgotten I had. I made allowances because I remembered what it was to be a boy who wanted to become anything else to escape the confines of his small world. I gave lectures when I should have drawn lines, firm boundaries. If parenting is a season, mine had too much spring and not enough winter. High school came and Matthew found football, and football in turn found him back. He was good. Good enough to make Friday nights feel like an answer, a reprieve from the quiet anxieties that gnawed at me. For a while I believed in that answer. I learned his jersey number, by the way, strangers shouted it from the bleachers. I learned the names of the girls he never brought home. I learned that after a win he wanted burgers greasy and satisfying. After a loss he wanted silence, a heavy, impenetrable shroud. I relished driving him to practice in the county truck when I got permission, proud and careful, as if the steering wheel controlled more than one life, more than my own. Money was never a friend, but we were polite with each other. I took a second job a few nights a week at Miller's Hardware, stocking shelves, mixing paint, listening to the quiet desperation in other men's voices as they bought screws and paint and asked for advice they pretended they didn't need. I put a little from each paycheck into a 529 plan with Matthew's name on it. Every month, no matter what, $50, sometimes $100, sometimes $20. If the old car had developed a new worrying noise, it didn't look like much. Those small, consistent deposits. Cumulative things never do until they do. Senior year, a letter with a crest arrived in the mail. Not a top-tier school, not a joke either. A college far enough to feel like a new life, a fresh start. Close enough that I could still drive 3 hours and show up if the voice in my head told me to, if the instinct of fatherhood demanded it. You did it, I said, holding the letter, a thin piece of paper that felt impossibly heavy with the weight of my hopes and dreams, as if it might jump out of my hand. Matthew didn't read it again. He just said, "Yeah," and looked past me to a screen, his attention already elsewhere. We celebrated at Sal's Pizza, a local institution with sticky red vinyl booths with 2 sodas and a large half pepperoni, half mushroom pie. The bill came with a stupid fortune cookie because Sal thought it was funny to mix cultures in his small-town diner. I cracked it open, and inside I got the only fortune that has ever made me feel like the universe was winking, sharing a private joke with me. "You will walk through fire and call it warmth." I didn't show Matthew. He would have made a joke, dismissed it with a shrug. I just put it in my wallet and carried it until it turned soft, the words worn smooth by my thumb, a constant quiet reminder of a strength I hadn't fully understood yet. College is a machine that eats money and time voraciously, relentlessly. The 529 plan, once a source of quiet pride, opened its mouth and found I had not fed it enough. The FAFSA form, that intrusive, all-knowing document, learned everything about our lives, every painful detail of our finances, and decided we could manage more than the truth, more than we actually had. The financial aid officer, a perky young woman with an impossibly bright smile, chirped like a flight attendant telling you there's no more room in the overhead bins. "We have options," she said, her voice dripping with artificial optimism. "We always do." One of the options, of course, was me. I worked extra weekends. I stopped fixing the little things around the house, learning to live with a rattle here, a leak there. I sold my old aluminum fishing boat, the one Ellen and I used to take out on Lake Seneca, because there are some afternoons you can't afford to spend twice. During his freshman year, Matthew called when he needed things, his voice bright and expectant. "Dad, my books were more than the estimate. Dad, the dorm requires a specific Ethernet adapter. Dad, my friend's car broke down. Can you—" There was always a reason. There is always a reason when you are the reason. I said yes because I wanted him to feel the floor under his feet as steady, as unwavering as I never had. I said yes because there were years when nobody had said it to me. And in my desperate attempt to give him a better start, I inadvertently taught him that my yes was a given, an endless, unconditional resource. Love, I learned too late, also has interest. It was during that first winter break that I found the first crack, wider than the rest, a fissure in the foundation that was too obvious to ignore. Matthew came home with a new pair of shoes that cost more than my first car's down payment. He said a friend gave them to him, a casual, dismissive explanation. I wanted to believe it because my love sometimes had bad taste in what it chose to ignore. But the next week when I went to pay the electric bill online, the password didn't work. I checked the mailbox and found a letter I had never seen before. A credit card I didn't remember applying for, with a balance I certainly didn't remember making. And there it was, glaring up at me from the statement my son's shipped to address. Smart kids make stupid mistakes. Stupid kids make smart thieves. I sat at the kitchen table, the numbers on the statement swimming before my eyes, while my coffee went cold beside me. When he woke up at noon, I had the envelope in front of me. "Matthew," I said, my voice quiet, almost hoarse. He looked at the mail like it was a test he hadn't studied for, then did the thing he always did when cornered. He shrugged, trying to make it small, insignificant. "I was going to tell you," he mumbled. "Tell me what I pressed. It's just a card. I needed a way to build credit. You always said—" "I said, build, not borrow my name," I replied, and my voice came out in a tone I had used on broken appliances, patient, disbelieving already, doing the math in the background, calculating the extent of the damage. He went defensive, that familiar automatic shield. "I'm busy. I've got exams. I'll fix it. How I'll figure it out. It's not a big deal." "Whose name is on the bill?" I asked, pointing to the statement. He looked at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. "Yours." That I said, my voice finally rising, makes it a big deal. We had our first real argument then. The kind where two people set fire to a bridge without realizing they might still need it. He accused me of not understanding what it's like to be young now, of being old-fashioned, out of touch. I accused him of not understanding what it's like to keep the lights on to pay for his choices. He slammed a door, the sound echoing through the small house like a gunshot. I stood there staring at the wood grain and realized I was talking to someone who had learned my best habits: work, show up, pay. But none of my caution, none of my careful planning. He apologized 2 days later, his tone laced with a performative regret that wanted the apology to be enough, a magic eraser for the damage. I paid the bill. I told the bank to close the card. I told myself kids make mistakes. I told myself things you tell yourself when you are afraid to say out loud what the pattern is starting to look like. If there was a single moment I could point to and say, "Here," it would be smaller than you'd expect. A Saturday morning, the summer after his sophomore year. He was home for 2 weeks, working part-time at his friend's uncle's garage, mostly sleeping like it was his full-time job. I left $50 under a paperweight on the counter with a note: groceries for the week. When I came home that night, there was a pizza box on the table and a receipt for $48.73. The fridge held half a bottle of soda and 6 packets of ketchup. I stood there holding the receipt, and I heard Ellen's voice in my head, as clear as if she were standing beside me. "Don't let him write your ending." I laughed a little at myself, a dry, bitter sound, and said out loud to an empty kitchen, "It's $50, not a will." And then I threw the receipt away because I wasn't ready for it to become an artifact of something I wasn't ready to name. He graduated in fits, and starts not with honors, not with anything particularly noteworthy, but with a handshake and a piece of paper that the world would respect when it wanted to. I wore the only suit I own, a dark, ill-fitting garment that smelled faintly of mothballs, and held my applause in the right places for the right names. After the ceremony, he stood with his arm around a girl named Kara, who had the kind of bright, ambition-filled eyes I recognized from Ethan, and said things about startups that sounded like rain at a distance far off and indistinct. "Proud of you," I told him, and I meant it. The check from the last semester cleared the week before. Pride and relief are cousins who arrived together hand in hand. The first job came with a salary that looked bigger on the offer letter than it felt after rent, and the things his generation calls non-negotiables. I watched him assemble a life like an expensive chair from a store that doesn't include the Allen wrench, always needing one more part, one more tool. Every time he called, there was a new cost, a deposit, a new tire. A trip. I drew a line when I could, then moved it, when he asked, my resolve softening under the pressure of his needs. The 529 was a memory. My IRA blinked at me each quarter, its balance slowly dwindling, as if to say, "You sure?" I told it yes more often than I should have. Love, I learned, also has interest, and sometimes the principle gets eaten away entirely. Once, when I asked him how his week was, he said busy in a tone that made it sound like a weapon, a shield. I didn't realize then how that word would come back to me, echoing in the cold silence of a phone line with a doctor waiting on the other end, waiting for him to show up. Busy. As if the seconds I had left were less valuable than the ones he had scheduled. As if the ledger we shared as a family could be balanced by convenience, by a dismissive wave of the hand. I am not a saint. There are things I could have done differently. I could have made him get a campus job that first year, instead of telling him the focus should be on classes. I could have insisted he ride the bus instead of paying for the parking pass. I could have said no more often with more conviction. I could have demanded accountability when I accepted apologies that felt hollow. But the truth, the cold, heavy truth that sits in my chest now like a coin too large to swallow, is that I did what fathers do when they believe they can be gravity. I kept him from falling, and in doing so I taught him the ground would always be there, always soft, always ready to catch him. I had become his floor, and he in turn had learned to walk all over me. The hospital, when it wants to, gives you space to replay your life without interruption, a stark theater for your regrets. The nurse brought me a tray I didn't touch and a pill I did, swallowing it dry, the bitterness, a familiar taste. The drip returned to the sound of rain, and I walked again through the years, a ghost in my own memories, moving through rooms I once owned. The walls were hung with portraits. I didn't hang me with a baby on my chest, me at a football field with a folding chair, me at a table with a bill, and a pen, me in a suit. That didn't quite hide the tiredness in my eyes. In each one, Matthew was beside me, or just out of frame, always looking past me at something brighter, something farther away. There was one last memory. I hadn't let myself go to a door I had kept firmly shut because it stung worse than all the rest. A gift that wasn't. The summer after his college graduation, I took Matthew to Ellen's favorite diner, Sal's, the only place left in town that still served coffee like they meant it, strong and black. I handed him a small box wrapped in the cheap paper I used for gifts, because I never learned how to do ribbons. Inside was Ellen's watch, the one with the cracked face, the one from the plastic bag I'd brought home from the hospital, repaired as well as a repairman could manage. "It was your mother's," I said, my voice thick with unspoken emotion, "and now it's yours." He lifted it out of the tissue paper, looked at it for 2 beats longer than polite, and then said, "It's old." "It kept our time," I replied, hearing how sentimental and foolish I sounded, only after the words were out exposed in the diner's harsh fluorescent light. "Thanks, Dad," he said, and kissed my cheek, a perfunctory peck, and we ate pancakes. And I told myself the warmth in my chest was joy, not the last flare before something cools, before the embers finally die. 6 months later, I saw that watch again. It was on the wrist of a pawn shop clerk, a skinny kid with too many tattoos, when I was buying a new blade for my hacksaw. "Where'd you get that?" I asked, before I could stop myself, the words tearing from my throat, raw and uncontrolled. "Trade-in," he said, not looking up. "Kid needed cash fast. Nice piece. Vintage." I didn't say my son's name. I didn't say anything. I just bought the blade and left. I stood in the parking lot with the hacksaw in a paper bag, the sun glaring down, and realized some things don't break. They are given away. On the drive home, I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white, as if it might keep me from floating out of my lane and into another life entirely. I kept that secret to myself, a quiet, festering wound, because shame makes quiet prisoners. I didn't bring it up when we spoke, when he called to ask for another loan. How do you tell your child that you saw your wife's time, a precious, irreplaceable legacy, sold for a tank of gas and a night out? How do you admit you enabled it, blurring the lines between want and need for too long until they became indistinguishable? The IV pump clicked, a sudden jarring reminder of my present. The hospital room swam back into focus, the murmuring of a shift change at the nurse's station drifting in like the hum of distant bees. I opened my eyes to the fluorescent truth, the stark, unforgiving light. Footsteps approached. "Mr. Miller." It was the same nurse, the one with the soft hands and the stiff ponytail. Her face, framed by the bright light, held a mixture of apology and grim determination. "A couple of updates for you. We'll be moving you out of critical observation to a step-down unit this afternoon." She paused, took a deep breath. "Also, we tried your son again for consent on a test earlier. He declined. He said to email him, and he'd look when he wasn't." She stopped, her voice trailing off, reluctant to finish the sentence. I smiled for her, a small, weary smile to rescue her from the line she didn't want to finish. Busy, I said, the word falling from my lips, not with bitterness or anger, but with a quiet, devastating clarity. It landed on the floor like a tool I didn't need anymore, its edge dulled by overuse. Yes, she said, her eyes apologizing for something that wasn't hers to own. Do you have another emergency contact you'd like us to list? She held out her clipboard like an offering a small white flag. There it was, the smallest twist, quiet as a pen point. I had run out of names to put between me and the void. Not because I was alone in the world, not truly, but because I had in my misguided love and relentless enabling made one person into my entire world and called it love. List my neighbor Hank Keller, I said after a breath, the words surprisingly steady. He's 2 doors down. Been there 30 years. He'll answer. Her eyebrows rose a flicker of surprise as if I had spoken of foreign wisdom of a world she hadn't considered. She wrote the name, her pen scratching against the paper. Thank you, she said, as if I had done her a favor by giving my life as a witness who wasn't blood but knew what it meant to show up. When she left, I looked at the photograph of Ellen still propped in the water cup's shadow. The cracked face of her watch flashed in my mind, a fleeting image, and then disappeared. I reached for the notebook on the tray, the weapon forged in ink, and wrote one word, busy. I underlined it twice. Then beneath it I wrote another, enough. The IV clicked again, that familiar rhythm. In that sound I heard a clock I chose to keep a new metronome for a life I was now reclaiming. The rain faded. The roof held. I thought of Hank, how he had shown up the week after Ellen's funeral with a casserole so heavy it bowed the table and a quiet that wasn't empty but full of understanding. He had given Matthew his first summer job mowing the strip of common grass at the end of the block and paid him in cash and pride. He had told me once, leaning over the fence, kids don't always know we're hauling them uphill, Art. They just think the view is their birthright. I didn't understand the true shape of that sentence until now. The orderly arrived with a grin and strong, capable hands. How are we doing, Mr. Miller? He asked, his voice cheerful, as he unlocked the bed wheels. Better than I deserve, I said, the phrase I use when I am both grateful and tired, when the weight of the world feels both heavy and strangely exhilarating. He laughed, a warm, genuine sound. We're going to roll you to a room with a window. You'll like it. The light's real. He paused, looking at my notebook, and nodded, the way you do when you see someone else building something with their hands, a quiet acknowledgement of shared craft. You? Writing a book, he teased. Just balancing a ledger, I said. Aha, he replied, not understanding and understanding all at once. Hold on. Bump coming. The hall smelled less like bleach and more like people, a faint hum of humanity. A television somewhere played a game show. Nobody watched, its canned laughter echoing faintly. A man in a paper gown shuffled with determination, his wife steering his IV pole like a parade balloon. Life rude and right moved around me, a chaotic, beautiful symphony. As the bed turned, the wheels hummed on a seam in the floor. It sounded like a hinge being greased, a door prepared for use. In the window, the afternoon, a promise of light and openness, put a bright rectangle on a chair. I thought of a different chair, the one at my kitchen table where my boy once wrote astronaut with a green crayon and drew a dinosaur in a helmet, his eyes full of uncomplicated wonder. And I felt something in me slide into place, not with anger but with decision. Some debts are paid in money, some in time, some in knowledge, and some are paid in a silence that refuses to do your lying for you anymore. The bed clicked into position in a new room, the soft murmur of the hospital continuing its ceaseless rhythm. The nurse checked my vitals, her touch gentle and professional. The orderly left with a thumbs up that felt like a benediction, a silent blessing for the journey ahead. I set the notebook on my lap. The pen waited, a tool that knew its job, its purpose. Day 2 was starting. The rain had stopped. The roof had done what it was supposed to do. In the quiet that followed, I turned a page, a crisp, clean slate, and began to write down not who Matthew had been, but who I would be from here on. The next door had a handle I could already feel in my palm. A phone call. I would make a file. I would request a name. I would add to an account that no longer bore his. The planning wouldn't look like revenge. It would look like clarity put to work. It would look like a man choosing where his love lives, where his legacy resides. The monitor beeped steady and plain. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled. Outside the window, a maple leaf trembled and held. I closed my eyes and saw a page become a plan. Then I opened them because the time for sleeping through my own life was over. The light in the new room was honest. Not the surgical glare of the ER or the soft, deceptive glow of monitors in the night, but a square of afternoon sunlight pinned to the floor like someone had finally opened a window in a house that had been shut too long. The IV ticked a steady, measured rhythm. The notebook waited on my lap, a blank canvas for the blueprint of a life I was determined to rebuild. If I'd had a hammer and a set of joist hangers, I would have started framing a wall then and there. Instead, I had paper and a pen. I wrote the only blueprint that mattered now, a list. Assets, accounts, policies, contacts. What I knew, what I didn't, what needed to be insulated, what needed to be cut loose. The first page looked like a grocery list for a man reclaiming his future, not a will. County pension custodian, perennial retirement services. Checking First Central Credit Union Main Street branch. Savings same. IRA, Beacon Mutual. Life insurance term 20-year, issued the year after Ellen died. Beneficiary Matthew. Last I checked, House Maple Street. Title me, car 2008, Ford free and clear. Utility accounts my name only. My social security account two-factor disabled because I'd never set it up. I underlined that twice. My hands shook on the lines, but the letters were clear, precise. Order, I'd learned, calms men like me. It gives you edges to hold onto a structure against the chaos of doubt. I didn't trust my memory to be a witness who would show up on time, so I wrote it all down. I called the nurse and asked for a phone charger. She nodded. Her expression, unreadable, disappeared, and came back with a plastic bin of confiscated cords and minor miracles. She told me I could use this one while I was here, saying they wiped them down after each patient. Secondhand grace, I thought, and offered her a small, tight smile, even if she didn't quite understand what exactly I was thinking, what silent war I was waging. The phone woke like a dog at the sound of my voice buzzing with missed calls. A voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. 3 texts from a roofing company I'd gotten a quote from in the spring, reminding me my warranty had expired the day before my collapse. A little late, aren't you? I thought grimly. I played the voicemail, turning the speaker low out of habit, the way you do when you don't want your business to leak into the hall, when you don't want anyone else to witness the raw truth. The voice was pleasant, neutral, professional. Hello, this is Brookside Care Intake following up with Matthew Hayes regarding Mr. Arthur Hayes. We have availability for a 30-minute evaluation on Thursday at 10:00 a.m. to discuss assisted living options and next steps. Please confirm. I let it play again and again. The voice remained pleasant, neutral, professional. The content was anything but. 30 minutes. Assisted living. Next steps. My name, my life, sounded like the subject of a meeting agenda, a problem to be solved, neatly scheduled between product launches and coffee breaks. I wrote the number in my notebook, drawing a box around it, a stark black frame. Then I wrote the day after tomorrow. My son had told a doctor he was busy when I was unconscious. And sometime before that, he had told a stranger that I was a problem to be solved neatly in half an hour. The IV ticked in a different rhythm. I realized it was my own heartbeat, quickened with a cold, slow burn of anger, making it sound that way. I didn't call them back. Not yet. I needed corroboration from a different angle. To build anything that stands, you need at least 3 points of contact. My next call was to the bank pension beneficiary. I dialed First Central Credit Union. The hold music was a flute. Someone had decided that sounded like trust. The customer service representative introduced herself as Kara and asked me to verify the last 4 digits of my social security number, my mother's maiden name, and the street I grew up on. No, I told her, regarding the last one, my voice flat, firm. Your online question says, favorite teacher. She chuckled, a light, airy sound momentarily breaking the sterile silence of the call. Mr. Miller, you sound like a man who reads the fine print. I am a man, I replied, my voice hard, who has learned what happens when you don't. How can I help you today? She asked, her tone now more serious, more attentive. I need to add a security word to my accounts, I told her, and a note that any changes must be in person at the Main Street branch with a photo ID and a phone call to this number that I will now give you. She confirmed they could add a verbal password and note my preference for in-person changes. She explained they couldn't enforce it bank-wide, but the branch would see it and their team would see the flag. Good, I said. Please add it. I gave her a word I hadn't used in a decade, the nickname Ellen called me when I was 25 and thought I had learned every lesson I would ever need. When she read it back to me, the sound of her voice echoing that forgotten endearment, I had to swallow hard before I could say correct. While I have you, I added, pushing past the unexpected wave of sentimentality, I'd like to review my account alerts, and I'd like to know if anyone has asked to be added as an authorized user or convenience signer in the last 12 months. There was typing, the standard duet of keys clicking. I'm seeing that in May, someone called from a number on file and asked about adding a convenience signer due to care needs expected in fall, but no paperwork was completed. What number? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She read a number that belonged to Matthew. I wasn't the agent, she said, almost apologetically, but the note says, adult son. The pen wrote before my brain fully processed it. May, Matthew, convenience signer, no paperwork. Thank you, I said. Please set up alerts for any cash withdrawals over $50, any external transfers, and any new payees added to bill pay. Also, I'd like a freeze on Zelle until I come in person. She explained she could disable Zelle on my profile, but I'd need to re-enable it with ID at the branch. That's the idea, I told her, a grim satisfaction settling in my gut. Anything else? Yes, I said. Could you list the external accounts currently linked? I see an ACH link to an account ending 2234 at Riverstone Bank added a year ago. By whom? By the primary account holder, she read, Mr. Arthur Miller. I closed my eyes. That was me. A year ago, Matthew had me set up an automatic monthly transfer for part of his rent, $200 on the first of every month, because he'd said it keeps the landlord off my back, and I'll pay you back when this promotion hits. I let her continue. There were several one-time transfers to the same account in the last 6 months. Amounts, I asked, though I could already see them in my head, each with its plausible reason. A belt for his car, a utility deposit, something that had to happen today, or else. 3 of them, she said. $150, $300, $480. I had said, all right, but I want to see a plan next time. And the next time had turned the plan into a promise, and the promise into another ask. Please remove that external account, I said. And she did. I heard the click on her keyboard like a bolt sliding home, a small, satisfying sound of a door being locked. Mr. Miller, she added quietly, her voice softening, I'm just a voice on a line, but I hope you're okay. I am, I said, and for the first time since the ER, I almost believed it. I ended the call. The room had grown brighter and smaller at once, my world shrinking to the stark, undeniable facts. I wrote Zelle disabled. Alerts. External removed. May call convenience signer. I drew a line and wrote in all caps, build walls. The pen didn't scratch. It bit. My next call was to Hank. He picked up on the second ring, his voice gruff but laced with relief. Arthur, he said, like a relief valve letting out pressure. They moved you to a window, yet they did, I told him. The light's real. Good, he said. Real light makes honest decisions. I have a favor, I said, cutting to the chase if you're up for it. You know better than to ask me that way, he replied, a hint of his dry humor in his voice. Just tell me where and when. My kitchen table, I said. Top right drawer. There's a folder labeled Retirement Beacon. Bring it and the blue folder behind it that says Insurance, and my file box from the hall closet. You'll see the one with silver tabs. I paused, gathering my thoughts. I also need my checkbook and the envelope with the house deed. It's in the safe. He whistled softly, a low, drawn-out sound. You making a run for the border, Art? I'm building a fence, I said. Ah, he replied, understanding dawning in his voice. I'll be there in an hour. You want me to turn off your porch light or leave it? Leave it on, I said. I don't know the dark anything. He arrived quicker than an hour. Nurses have a soft step. Men like Hank, big lumbering with hands like hams, do not. He came in with a canvas bag slung over his shoulder, clinking with contents like a contractor heading into a job, and set it on the chair in the rectangle of sunlight. I let myself in with your key, he said, his eyes scanning me for changes locked up after. Coffee maker was still on. I turned it off. He pulled the folders out, his movements methodical, and set them on the table rail like joists. You sure you're up for this? He asked, his voice laced with concern. I have to be, I said. He nodded. Then let's get to it. We went through the documents the way 2 men sort lumber, stacked by length and straightness, assessing their integrity. The Beacon folder held my original IRA agreement, the last quarter's statement, and a letter I didn't remember reading. Important notice regarding beneficiary designations. I opened it. The letter was dated 18 months ago. It reminded me that beneficiary designations control distribution regardless of wills and advised reviewing them after major life events. My major life event was 18 years ago, I muttered, my voice rough. Ellen died. Then your major life event is that you're still here. Art Hank said, his voice gentle but firm, pulling me back to the present. Who's listed, Matthew? I said. It came out heavier than the paper itself. You want that to change? He asked, his eyes steady on mine, offering no judgment. I looked at Ellen's picture on the tray table, then at my notebook, at the word enough. I want to think like a man with a plan, I said, my voice gaining strength, and not like a man with a wound. That means I don't make decisions because I'm mad. I make them because they're right. So what's right, he asked, plain as a hammer. Right, I said, is not letting my son believe love is an ATM he can punch when he's low on cash. Right is making sure the money I leave doesn't fund the same habits that broke the trust. Right is remembering that my wife believed in scholarships and lights paid on time. Then name a new purpose, he said, simple and direct. I wrote revisit beneficiaries. Consider community fund scholarship in Ellen's name. House, who I did not write Matthew's name next to the arrow, not because I was punishing him, but because I was moving the center of gravity back into my chest, back to where it belonged. Hank found the insurance policy. 10-year term renewed once 2 years left. Who's the beneficiary there, he asked. Matthew, I said, same as the IRA. You can split it, he said, ever practical. 80, 20-50, 50-10, 90. You can change it while you're in recovery. You just need to call and ask for the form. They'll email it or overnight it. He looked at me, his eyes sharp. Overnight it here to me, he said. I'll bring it back. If you need a witness, I am a person with a pen and a pulse. I looked at my hands. They were steady now. Not yet, I said. But soon. We spent an hour that way, him opening me, reading him, pointing me, deciding. The case manager came by. Twice a quiet woman with a soft step, and left twice. When she saw the papers spread on my lap, her good sense telling her her role was to offer, not to impose. We can talk about discharge planning tomorrow, she said, her voice reassuring. No rush. Thank you, I told her. I know who to call if I need a ramp. She laughed, a genuine warm sound. We have a vendor list, Hank grumbled. Don't pay their ramp guy. I'll build you one if you need it. I won't, I said, and we both knew I meant the second half of whatever sentence I didn't finish. When Hank left the room felt bigger, the square of light had moved a foot to the right. Time had kept marching without asking permission. I turned to the last task of the day, the pension. I called Perennial Retirement Services and made a stranger say standard things to me, their voice, a monotonous drone. We can update your beneficiaries by mail. We don't accept changes by phone. Can you overnight the form to my address, I asked. I'm in the hospital. We can email a PDF, she said, but we must receive an original signature. I can do that, I said. And while I have you, please add a note that no changes may be made by any power of attorney without a call to this number. If you need a password, I will give you one. We honor valid POAs, she said, her voice stiffening slightly. We can note your preference for calls. Do that, I said. I gave her a second word, a simple one, a word that meant to me, stop here unless I say go. After I hung up, I opened my wallet and slid out the fortune I had carried since Sal's. You will walk through fire and call it warmth. I set it next to Ellen's photo the way you put two tools side by side, because the next job needs both. Then I taped the fortune into the back cover of the notebook with a strip of paper tape the nurse had left. I wanted a record of the day I decided the old heat wasn't a comfort anymore. It was a warning. When Matthew called at last, his voice a torrent of irritation, he didn't start with, "How are you?" He started with, "The hospital called me twice." "What did you tell them the truth?" I said, my voice calm, steady. "That my emergency contact now is Hank." 2 doors down. Silence. Then he laughed, one note too high, brittle, strained. "Hank, the guy who smells like gasoline, the guy who shows up," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "Dad," he sighed, the sound heavy with exasperation. "I'm in the middle of a stretch here. We've got a product launch. I can't just be human for a day. Show up in a lobby," I said, my voice low, firm, "and write your name on a visitor sticker." He let the air hiss out of his lungs. "Don't make this a thing, Dad." "It is a thing," I said, the quiet conviction in my voice unwavering, because the time for pretending had put me in a bed. "It's 6 hours of your life," and a handshake to the man who kept the lights on. "What do you want?" he asked, the words sharp-edged with a familiar resentment. And there it was, the truest question, the ugliest. One I repeated, not to buy time, but to taste the word, to truly understand its weight. "I want you to stop lying to yourself about what we are. I want you to stop using busy like it's a mercy killing. I want you to understand that if you hand me over to a facility to make your schedule easier, you're not arranging care. You're arranging the removal of an inconvenience." "What facility?" he said sharply, a note of genuine surprise in his voice. "Brookside called," I said, my voice calm, deliberate. "They have time for a 30-minute evaluation on Thursday." Silence. Then, "That's not Dad, that's not what you think." "It is exactly what I think," I said, and the tiredness finally left my voice, replaced by a cold, hard resolve, because I am the subject of the evaluation. He exhaled a long, frustrated sound. Look, this is getting blown out of. I'll save you the trouble, I cut in my voice, unwavering. Tell them it won't be needed. Tell them their 30 minutes are free to go serve someone who wants to be treated like a calendar item. You're being dramatic, he snapped, that familiar dismissive phrase, the one people use to end an argument when they don't have an answer, when they want to avoid accountability. I let it sit between us, a heavy, unspoken truth, until it cooled. Matthew, I said softly, the words cutting through the silence sharper than any shout. You sold your mother's watch. He didn't speak for a whole beat. What? You heard me, I said. 2 years ago at the shop on Vine. I didn't say anything then because I was more ashamed of myself than angry at you. That changes today, not because I love you less, because I love truth more. He tried to go on the offensive, his voice rising, crackling with a desperate, wounded anger. So what now? You cut me out, you punish me, you sit there in your martyr bed, and… No, I said, cutting him off, and what surprised me most was the profound peace in my tone. I'm not punishing you. I'm finally refusing to participate. That will feel like punishment to a person who has mistaken access for love. He breathed through his teeth, a harsh, ragged sound. I have to go, he said, his voice tight. Of course you do, I said. You're busy. And I hung up first, not to win, but to end. After the call, the room needed air, needed to breathe, needed to clear itself of the bitter taste of truth. I opened the tiny hospital window as far as it would go, which was about 3 inches. Enough for the place to breathe, but not enough for it to forget its rules, its limitations. A bus sighed on the street, its mechanical exhalation a distant sound. Someone laughed in the distance, the faint, carefree sound of a life that didn't know mine was changing fundamentally, irrevocably. I wrote in the notebook, busy equals okay to leave. Number. Then Brookside Thursday, cancel. Then a line firm and unyielding beneath it, planning tomorrow. Call lawyer. I wrote his name, Samuel Pike. We had used him once years ago to do the closing when I refinanced the house the year Matthew started college. He had a habit of tapping his pen on his legal pad, like a metronome, a steady, deliberate rhythm. And he had represented more people who looked like me, quiet, practical, no nonsense, than like the men who wore the busier suits, the flashier, more aggressive types. He would not talk about revenge. He would talk about paper. Paper is where men like me reclaim things. The case manager returned with a folder of forms, advance directives, healthcare proxy, and a DNR explanation. She gave these to everyone, she said gently, her voice soft, reassuring. You don't have to decide anything today. But I can, I said, and I took a pen. I read the pages like a carpenter reads a truss diagram, what load goes where, what span needs reinforcement, what load-bearing facts cannot be ignored. I listed Hank as someone who should be told the truth, even when the truth didn't flatter me, didn't paint me in the best light. I did not list my son, not because I was cutting him out of my life, but because I was cutting him out of the room where he keeps turning off the lights, where he keeps plunging me into darkness. Night returned like a rescuer, a soft, enveloping blanket. The square of daylight slipped off the chair and onto the wall, then onto the floor, and then nowhere at all, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. The hallway pulse softened the sounds of the hospital, receding into a quiet hum. The nurse checked my vitals, her touch light and professional. You look steadier, she said, a note of genuine observation in her voice. Steady is the point, I said, my voice calm, deliberate. Stability is the foundation. Everything else is finished work. When she left, the quiet settled in like a familiar blanket. I took the photo of Ellen and held it so the light from the monitor touched her face, illuminating her gentle smile. I'm building a fence, Elle, I said in a voice that felt like a prayer that didn't need an answer. Not to keep love out, to keep respect in. I set the picture back and closed my eyes. The IV's click turned to rain again, then to the sound of a pencil on an index card, then to nothing at all, which is just another way of saying rest. I woke once in the dark to the buzz of my phone, a faint vibration against the tray. A text from an unknown number, reminder. Brookside Care Intake Thursday 10:00 a.m. Reply. Yes, to confirm, no to cancel. I did not reply. Instead, I typed stop, and the phone accepted the answer with a little digital nod. One channel closed, many to open tomorrow. In the morning, I would call Samuel Pike at 9 sharp. I would ask for a review of my will, my beneficiaries, and my house title. I would ask about a revocable trust in my name with a successor trustee who answered the phone when I called. Maybe not family. I would ask for a letter to the bank, to the pension, to the IRA custodians, to the insurance company, to anyone who would listen. All changes are to be verified with me alone using the passwords I have set. And if anyone else calls, tell them the man is still alive and decides for himself. I would ask for a paper fence with posts sunk deep. Tonight I did not have to finish anything. I only had to begin. The notebook lay on the blanket like a map. I drew one more line under the day's work. Today walls. Tomorrow gates. Beyond that, I wrote a single word I hadn't let myself use for a long time because I had confused it with anger when it's just clarity applied. Accountability. The elevator down the hall dinged a soft, distant chime. A cart rattled. The window accepted the morning before the sky even admitted it. I closed the notebook and put the pen across it like a latch. Then I turned my head toward the light and slept like a man who has finally stopped dreaming about the wrong house and started drawing the right one. The light in my new room was honest. Not the surgical glare of the ER, nor the soft, deceptive glow of monitors in the night, but a square of afternoon sunlight, stark and unblinking, pinned to the floor like someone had finally opened a window in a house that had been shut too long. The IV ticked a steady, measured rhythm against the silence. The notebook waited on my lap, a blank canvas for the blueprint of a life I was determined to rebuild. If I'd had a hammer and a set of joist hangers, I would have started framing a wall then and there. Instead, I had paper and a pen. I wrote the only blueprint that mattered, now a list. Assets, accounts, policies, contacts, what I knew, what I didn't, what needed to be insulated, what needed to be cut loose. The first page looked less like a will and more like a grocery list for a man reclaiming his future. County pension custodian, perennial retirement services. Checking First Central Credit Union Main Street branch. Savings same. IRA, Beacon Mutual. Life insurance term. 20-year, issued the year after Ellen died. Beneficiary Matthew. Last I checked. House Maple Street. Title me. Car 2008. Ford free and clear. Utility accounts my name only. My social security account two-factor disabled because I'd never set it up. I underlined that, twice the pen digging into the paper. My hands shook on the lines, but the letters were clear, precise. Order I'd learned calms men like me. It gives you edges to hold on to a structure against the chaos of doubt. I didn't trust my memory to be a witness who would show up on time, so I wrote it all down, a methodical catalog of my besieged life. I called the nurse and asked for a phone charger. She nodded, her expression unreadable, disappeared, and came back with a plastic bin of confiscated cords and minor miracles. She told me I could use this one while I was here, saying they wiped them down after each patient. Secondhand grace. I thought a grim amusement, and offered her a small, tight smile, even if she didn't quite understand what silent war I was waging. The phone woke like a dog at the sound of my voice buzzing with missed calls. A voicemail from a number I didn't recognize, its caller ID showing simply unknown. 3 texts from a roofing company I'd gotten a quote from in the spring reminding me my warranty had expired the day before my collapse. A little late, aren't you, I thought grimly, the irony a bitter taste in my mouth. I played the voicemail, turning the speaker low out of habit, not wanting my business, this raw, ugly truth, to leak into the hall. The voice was pleasant, neutral, professional. It announced itself as Brookside Care Intake, following up with Matthew Hayes regarding Mr. Arthur Hayes. It mentioned availability for a 30-minute evaluation on Thursday at 10:00 a.m. to discuss assisted living options and next steps, and asked for confirmation. I let it play again and again. The voice remained pleasant, neutral, professional. The content was anything but. 30 minutes. Assisted living. Next steps. My name, my life, sounded like the subject of a meeting agenda. A problem to be solved, neatly scheduled between product launches and coffee breaks. I wrote the number in my notebook, drawing a stark black box around it. Then I wrote the day after tomorrow. My son had told a doctor he was busy when I was unconscious, and sometime before that he had told a stranger that I was a problem to be solved neatly in half an hour. The IV ticked in a different rhythm. I realized it was my own heartbeat, quickened with a cold, slow burn of anger, making it sound that way. I didn't call them back then. Not yet. I needed corroboration from a different angle. To build anything that stands, I remembered from my days on the force, you need at least 3 points of contact. My next call was to the bank. First Central Credit Union. The hold music was a flute someone had decided that sounded like trust, a mocking melody. The customer service representative introduced herself as Kara and asked me to verify the last 4 digits of my social security number, my mother's maiden name, and the street I grew up on. I corrected her on the last one, telling her their online question said favorite teacher. She chuckled, a light, airy sound momentarily breaking the sterile silence of the call. She remarked that I sounded like a man who reads the fine print. I told her my voice hard that I was a man who had learned what happens when you don't. I then stated my need to add a security word to my accounts and a note that any changes must be made in person at the Main Street branch with a photo ID and a phone call to a specific number I would provide. She confirmed they could add a verbal password and note my preference for in-person changes, explaining they couldn't enforce it bank-wide, but the branch would see it and their team would see the flag. I agreed, asking her to add it. I gave her a word I hadn't used in a decade. The nickname Ellen called me when I was 25 and thought I had learned every lesson I would ever need. When she read it back to me, the sound of her voice echoing that forgotten endearment, I had to swallow hard the lump in my throat, surprisingly painful before I could confirm it was correct. While I have you, I added, pushing past the unexpected wave of sentimentality. I'd like to review my account alerts, and I'd like to know if anyone has asked to be added as an authorized user or convenience signer in the last 12 months. There was typing, the standard duet of keys clicking. She informed me she saw that in May someone had called from a number on file and asked about adding a convenience signer due to care needs expected in the fall, but no paperwork was completed. I demanded the number, my voice barely a whisper. She read a number that belonged to Matthew. She mentioned she wasn't the agent who took the call, but the note in the file stated adult son. The pen in my hand wrote before my brain fully processed it. May. Matthew. Convenience signer. No paperwork. Thank you, I said, forcing the words out. Please set up alerts for any cash withdrawals over $50, any external transfers, and any new payees added to bill pay. Also, I'd like a freeze on Zelle until I come in person. She explained she could disable Zelle on my profile, but I'd need to re-enable it with ID at the branch. That's the idea, I told her, a grim satisfaction settling in my gut. Anything else? Yes, I said. Could you list the external accounts currently linked? She told me she saw an ACH link to an account ending 2234 at Riverstone Bank added a year ago. I asked who added it. She read, by the primary account holder Mr. Privercom, Arthur Miller. I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea washing over me. That was me. A year ago, Matthew had convinced me to set up an automatic monthly transfer for part of his rent, $200 on the first of every month, because he'd said it keeps the landlord off my back and I'll pay you back when this promotion hits. She continued, listing several one-time transfers to the same account in the last 6 months. Amounts I asked, though I could already see them in my head, each with its plausible reason: a belt for his car, a utility deposit, something that had to happen today or else. She listed them $150, $300, $480. I had said, all right, but I want to see a plan next time, and the next time had turned the plan into a promise and the promise into another ask. Please remove that external account, I said. And she did. I heard the click on her keyboard like a bolt sliding home, a small, satisfying sound of a door being locked. Mr. Miller, she added quietly, her voice softening. I'm just a voice on a line, but I hope you're okay. I am, I said, and for the first time since the ER, I almost believed it. I ended the call. The room had grown brighter and smaller at once, my world shrinking to the stark, undeniable facts. I wrote Zelle disabled. Alerts. External removed. May call convenience signer. I drew a line and wrote in all caps, build walls. The pen didn't scratch, it bit. My next call was to Hank. He picked up on the second ring, his voice gruff but laced with relief. He asked if they had moved me to a window yet, and I confirmed, telling him the light was real. He replied that real light makes honest decisions. I then told him I had a favor to ask if he was up for it. He told me I knew better than to ask him that way and to just tell him where and when. I gave him instructions for finding specific folders and documents at my house: the retirement beacon folder, the blue insurance folder, my file box from the hall closet with silver tabs, my checkbook, and the envelope with the house deed from the safe. He whistled softly, a low, drawn-out sound, asking if I was making a run for the border. I told him I was building a fence. He understood then, saying he'd be there in an hour, and asking if I wanted him to turn off my porch light or leave it on. I told him to leave it on, that I didn't owe the dark anything. He arrived quicker than an hour. Nurses have a soft step. Men like Hank, big lumbering with hands, like hams, do not. He came in with a canvas bag slung over his shoulder, clinking with contents like a contractor heading into a job, and set it on the chair in the rectangle of sunlight. He told me he'd let himself in with my key and locked up after, and that the coffee maker was still on, so he'd turned it off. He pulled the folders out, his movements methodical, and set them on the table rail like joists. He asked if I was sure I was up for this. I told him I had to be. He nodded. He then told me, "Then let's get to it." We went through the documents the way two men sort lumber stacked by length and straightness, assessing their integrity. The beacon folder held my original IRA agreement, the last quarter's statement, and a letter I didn't remember reading, important notice regarding beneficiary designations. I opened it. The letter was dated 18 months ago. It reminded me that beneficiary designations control distribution regardless of wills and advised reviewing them after major life events. My major life event was 18 years ago, I muttered, my voice rough. Ellen died. Hank gently reminded me that my major life event was that I was still here. He asked who was listed. I said Matthew. It came out heavier than the paper itself. Hank then asked if I wanted that to change, his eyes steady on mine, offering no judgment. I looked at Ellen's picture on the tray table, then at my notebook at the word enough. I told him I wanted to think like a man with a plan, not like a man with a wound, and that meant I didn't make decisions because I was mad, but because they were right. He asked what was right. I told him that right was not letting my son believe love was an ATM he could punch when he's low on cash. Right was making sure the money I leave doesn't fund the same habits that broke the trust. Right was remembering that my wife believed in scholarships and lights paid on time. Hank, plain as a hammer, then told me to name a new purpose. I wrote revisit beneficiaries. Consider community fund scholarship in Ellen's name. House, who I did not write Matthew's name next to the arrow, not because I was punishing him, but because I was moving the center of gravity back into my chest, back to where it belonged. Hank found the insurance policy. 10-year term renewed, once 2 years left. He asked who the beneficiary was there. I said Matthew, same as the IRA. He told me I could split it 80, 20-50, 50-10, 90, and that I could change it while I was in recovery. I just needed to call and ask for the form, and they'd email it or overnight it. He looked at me, his eyes sharp, and offered to have it overnighted to him, and he would bring it back, adding that if I needed a witness, he was a person with a pen and a pulse. I looked at my hands. They were steady now. Not yet, I said. But soon. We spent an hour that way, Hank opening the documents, me reading them, him pointing out key sections, me deciding. The case manager came by twice, a quiet woman with a soft step, and left twice when she saw the papers spread on my lap. Her good sense telling her her role was to offer, not to impose. She told me we could talk about discharge planning tomorrow, that there was no rush. I thanked her, telling her I knew who to call if I needed a ramp. She laughed, a genuine warm sound. Hank grumbled that they had a vendor list, and I shouldn't pay their ramp guy because he'd build me one if I needed it. I told him I wouldn't, and we both knew I meant the second half of whatever sentence I didn't finish. When Hank left, the room felt bigger. The square of light had moved a foot to the right. Time had kept marching without asking permission. I turned to the last task of the day, the pension. I called Perennial Retirement Services and made a stranger say standard things to me, her voice a monotonous drone. She explained they could update my beneficiaries by mail, but didn't accept changes by phone. I asked if she could overnight the form to my address, explaining I was in the hospital. She said they could email a PDF, but they must receive an original signature. I confirmed I could do that. I then asked her to add a note that no changes could be made by any power of attorney without a call to a specific number, offering to give her a password if needed. She stiffened slightly, stating they honored valid POAs but could note my preference for calls. I told her to do that. I gave her a second word, a simple one, a word that meant to me, stop here unless I say go. After I hung up, I opened my wallet and slid out the fortune I had carried since Sal's. You will walk through fire and call it warmth. I set it next to Ellen's photo, the way you put two tools side by side, because the next job needs both. Then I taped the fortune into the back cover of the notebook with a strip of paper tape the nurse had left. I wanted a record of the day. I decided the old heat wasn't a comfort anymore. It was a warning. When Matthew called at last, his voice a torrent of irritation, he didn't start with, "How are you?" He started with, "The hospital called me twice." "What did you tell them?" I told him the truth, that my emergency contact now was Hank 2 doors down. Silence. Then he laughed, one note too high, brittle, strained. He asked if I meant Hank, the guy who smells like gasoline. I told him Hank was the guy who shows up. "Dad," he sighed, the sound heavy with exasperation. "I'm in the middle of a stretch here. We've got a product launch. I can't just be human for a day." I told him, my voice low, firm, to show up in a lobby and write your name on a visitor sticker. He let the air hiss out of his lungs. "He told me not to make this a thing, Dad." I told him it was a thing because the time for pretending had put me in a bed, and it was 6 hours of his life and a handshake to the man who kept the lights on. He then sharply asked what I wanted. I repeated the word want, not to buy time, but to taste it, to truly understand its weight. I told him I wanted him to stop lying to himself about what we were. I wanted him to stop using busy like it was a mercy killing. I wanted him to understand that if he handed me over to a facility to make his schedule easier, he wasn't arranging care but arranging the removal of an inconvenience. He sharply asked what facility. I calmly told him Brookside had called and had time for a 30-minute evaluation on Thursday. Silence. Then he said, "That's not Dad, that's not what you think." I told him it was exactly what I thought because I was the subject of the evaluation, and the tiredness finally left my voice, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He exhaled a long, frustrated sound and started to say it was getting blown out of. I cut him off, telling him I'd save him the trouble, and to tell them it wouldn't be needed, that their 30 minutes were free to go serve someone who wanted to be treated like a calendar item. He snapped that I was being dramatic, that familiar dismissive phrase people use to end an argument when they don't have an answer. I let it sit between us until it cooled. "Matthew," I said softly, the words cutting through the silence sharper than any shout, "you sold your mother's watch." He didn't speak for a whole beat. He asked what I told him. He heard me, that it was 2 years ago at the shop on Vine, and I hadn't said anything then because I was more ashamed of myself than angry at him. I then told him that changed today, not because I loved him less, but because I loved truth more. He tried to go on the offensive, his voice rising, crackling with a desperate, wounded anger, asking, what now if I was cutting him out, punishing him, sitting in my martyr bed? No, I said, cutting him off, and what surprised me most was the profound peace in my tone. I told him I wasn't punishing him, but finally refusing to participate, and that would feel like punishment to a person who had mistaken access for love. He breathed through his teeth a harsh, ragged sound. He said he had to go. "Of course you do," I said. "You're busy." And I hung up first, not to win, but to end. After the call, the room needed air, needed to breathe, needed to clear itself of the bitter taste of truth. I opened the tiny hospital window as far as it would go, which was about 3 inches. Enough for the place to breathe, but not enough for it to forget its rules, its limitations. A bus sighed on the street, its mechanical exhalation, a distant sound. Someone laughed in the distance, the faint, carefree sound of a life that didn't know mine was changing, fundamentally, irrevocably. I wrote in the notebook, busy equals okay to leave number. Then Brookside Thursday cancel. Then a line firm and unyielding beneath it, planning tomorrow. Call lawyer. I wrote his name, Samuel Pike. We had used him once years ago to do the closing when I refinanced the house the year Matthew started college. He had a habit of tapping his pen on his legal pad like a metronome, a steady, deliberate rhythm, and he had represented more people who looked like me, quiet, practical, no nonsense, than like the men who wore the busier suits, the flashier, more aggressive types. He would not talk about revenge. He would talk about paper. Paper is where men like me reclaim things. The case manager returned with a folder of forms, advanced directives, healthcare proxy, and a DNR explanation. "She gave these to everyone," she said, gently, her voice soft, reassuring. "She told me I didn't have to decide anything today." But I told her I could, and I took a pen. I read the pages like a carpenter reads a truss diagram. What load goes where? What span needs reinforcement? What load-bearing facts cannot be ignored? I listed Hank as someone who should be told the truth, even when the truth didn't. Flatter me didn't paint me in the best light. I did not list my son, not because I was cutting him out of my life, but because I was cutting him out of the room where he keeps turning off the lights, where he keeps plunging me into darkness. Night returned like a rescuer, a soft, enveloping blanket. The square of daylight slipped off the chair and onto the wall, then onto the floor, and then nowhere at all, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. The hallway pulse softened the sounds of the hospital, receding into a quiet hum. The nurse checked my vitals, her touch light and professional. She noted that I looked steadier. I told her steady was the point, that stability was the foundation, and everything else was finished work. When she left, the quiet settled in like a familiar blanket. I took the photo of Ellen and held it so the light from the monitor touched her face, illuminating her gentle smile. "I'm building a fence, Elle," I said in a voice that felt like a prayer that didn't need an answer. "Not to keep love out, to keep respect in." I set the picture back and closed my eyes. The IV's click turned to rain again, then to the sound of a pencil on an index card, then to nothing at all, which is just another way of saying rest. I woke once in the dark to the buzz of my phone, a faint vibration against the tray. A text from an unknown number. Reminder. Brookside Care Intake Thursday, 1000 a.m. Reply yes to confirm, no to cancel. I did not reply. Instead, I typed stop, and the phone accepted the answer with a little digital nod. One channel closed, many to open tomorrow. In the morning, I would call Samuel Pike at 9 sharp. I would ask for a review of my will, my beneficiaries, and my house title. I would ask about a revocable trust in my name with a successor trustee who answered the phone when I called. Maybe not family. I would ask for a letter to the bank, to the pension, to the IRA custodians, to the insurance company, to anyone who would listen. All changes are to be verified with me alone using the passwords I have set. And if anyone else calls, tell them the man is still alive and decides for himself. I would ask for a paper fence with posts sunk deep. Tonight I did not have to finish anything. I only had to begin. The notebook lay on the blanket like a map. I drew one more line under the day's work. Today walls, tomorrow gates. Beyond that, I wrote a single word I hadn't let myself use for a long time because I had confused it with anger when it's just clarity applied. Accountability. The elevator down the hall dinged a soft, distant chime. A cart rattled. The window accepted the morning before the sky even admitted it. I closed the notebook and put the pen across it like a latch. Then I turned my head toward the light and slept like a man who has finally stopped dreaming about the wrong house and started drawing the right one. The morning started with a ring I didn't recognize, clean, professional, like a smile on hold. I let it run twice before answering. Men like me don't rush anymore. We time our steps. Mr. Miller. The voice was sunlit, controlled. It was Lauren from Brookside Care. She wanted to follow up on Thursday's evaluation. The hook delivered itself. I kept my tone level. Good morning, Lauren, I told her. I received your message yesterday. Before we discuss anything, I need to be clear. I'm the patient. I'm alert, and I'm making my own medical decisions. A measured pause followed the faint rustle of paper audible on her end. She confirmed. Of course. Yes. We have you listed as a potential resident. I'm looking at the preliminary notes, another pause, thinner this time, as if she'd found a sentence she wasn't sure she should read. She then asked if I would like her to go over what was shared with them. Please, I said, my voice steady, and I turned my pen to a fresh page in my notebook. She began to read, her voice attempting to remain neutral, clinical. She relayed that my adult son, Matthew Hayes, had referred me. She said he expressed concern about me collapsing at home, increasing confusion, being combative when tired, and posing a safety risk. She mentioned the house was not secure, that there was financial strain, and that he was experiencing caregiver burnout. She hesitated, a slight catch in her voice. Then she continued with the projected plan, a 30-minute evaluation, possible waitlist bypass, with self-pay and the chilling detail, primary funding from the sale of father's property. The timeline, she added, aimed for the end of the month. I pressed the pen point to the paper hard enough to dot through a small, violent act. I watched the dot bloom, a dark stain on the pristine page, but I didn't watch the anger. Thank you, I said, my voice unwavering. I appreciate your transparency. Lauren exhaled a little into the phone, relief wrapped in professionalism. She then asked if I wished to proceed, explaining they usually scheduled an in-person assessment to determine the level of care and discussed paperwork, power of attorney. I asked about power of attorney, even though I already knew where this road wanted to lead. She softly confirmed and added, and a release for medical records. Another beat of silence. Mr. Miller, she then said, her voice betraying a hint of surprise, you sound quite oriented. I am, I said, which is why I'm going to ask you to cancel Thursday's appointment. Please note in your file that I, Arthur Miller, decline any evaluation, placement, or billing arrangements. If someone calls to schedule on my behalf, you may kindly inform them that I'm accepting and making my own care decisions. And one more thing, please send me a copy of the preliminary notes with my name on them. She offered to send their intake checklist and my referral summary explaining they didn't have medical records on me as this was pre-intake. Good, I said. Send those. And Lauren, make a note. Any further steps will be initiated by me only. I understand. Her voice lowered a fraction, dropping the script. For what it's worth, Mr. Miller. The call we received from your son sounded very rushed. We don't judge families. Everyone is doing their best. But something about this felt accelerated. She then offered, if you need an advocate, the county has a long-term care ombudsman. I can give you the number. There it was, the first crumb from a stranger who didn't owe me anything. A neutral turning a degree toward me. Please, I said, and wrote the number down like a nail in a stud. Thank you, Lauren. Cancel Thursday. Send the notes. And if anyone calls pretending to be me, you'll know the difference." She gave a small, almost conspiratorial chuckle. "I will." We said goodbye. I set the phone down and stared at the rectangle of light inching along the floor. Plans had been made about me. I just put a fence around them. The ivy clicked. I let it be a metronome. My pacing eased, then braided up again, the urgency returning. My next list item: recorder deed title. I dialed the county clerk's office. The hold message thanked me for my patience and promised the next available representative would be with me shortly. Patience and I thought grimly, have an old, complicated relationship. When the clerk picked up, her voice sounded like the front desk at a school efficient and a little weary. She introduced herself as Darla from the Marion County Recorder's Office. I told her my name was Arthur Miller and I owned a home on Maple Street. I wanted to check if any documents, deeds, liens, or title changes had been recorded against my property in the past 30 days. She said they could search by parcel or owner name. I gave her the address. She typed for a while, keys tapping like rain on an awning. She then informed me she wasn't seeing any new recordings in the last month, adding that the last deed was 10 years old, a refinance to remove a spouse due to a death certificate. "I'm sorry," she said. "You don't have to be." I swallowed the familiar ache returning. "One more question. Do you show any title inquiry from a company? Sometimes a title agency will pull a preliminary report." She blew out a breath. She said they didn't track inquiries, but she could tell me which title companies had accessed the parcel file in the last week if they did it through their portal. Just a second. More typing. She then said it looked like last Thursday there was a pull from Frontline Title, and she saw a prelim generated on their end, a public-facing note. Frontline Title. I repeated, writing the name down. I asked if she had a number for them. She said she wasn't supposed to, but it was public information, bending the rule with the soft professionalism of people who've watched too many rules help the wrong side. She read me a phone number. "Anything else, Mr. Miller?" she asked. "You've already given me more than most," I said. "Thank you, Darla." I called Frontline Title. A receptionist with perfect diction transferred me to a processor named Eric. He had a voice like a calculator, flat and devoid of warmth. He introduced himself as Eric from Frontline Title. "Eric, my name is Arthur Miller. I'm calling about a preliminary title report pulled last Thursday on my property. I want to know who requested it." He told me they couldn't disclose client names. "I'm the owner," I said, my voice low, firm, edged with a controlled fury. "And I'm in a hospital bed because my son thinks my life can be scheduled between product launches and appointments with facilities. I'm asking you to help me make sure my home doesn't move without me." A longer pause than any policy would sanction. Papers shuffled. He then carefully informed me that their client was an agent from Meadows Realty, requesting a preliminary estimate for a potential listing. He added he couldn't say more, explaining the report was public, but client details were not, as if to balance his scales. He then added that they listed the contact as Matthew Hayes. A pencil-thin line of heat ran down my spine and cooled all at once, a chilling confirmation. "Thank you," I said, my voice betraying nothing. "Please add to your internal note owner to be contacted personally before any open order proceeds. No activity, without written acknowledgement from Arthur Miller." He said they noted owner preferences, but it didn't legally bind them. "I understand," I replied. "Bindings happen elsewhere, but notes matter." I hung up. I sat there with the name Meadows Realty and pictured a for sale sign on my lawn, a sign I hadn't authorized, hadn't even imagined. This wasn't chaos for excitement's sake. It was a plan cold and calculated to make me a project and my house a funding source. Guomam Hano. The outline called this step. I wasn't sowing anything in anyone else's life. I was planting stakes where mine had started to slide. The case manager popped in with a soft knock. "Mr. Miller, I wanted to check about discharge planning." "Tomorrow," I said, my voice firm. "Today is for phone calls and paper." She smiled. "You're the only patient I've ever heard say that like it's a spa day." She glanced at the folders spread like blueprints. "Do you have support at home, Mr. Miller?" "Hank Keller," I said. 2 doors down. He's got a key and a conscience." "Good," she said. "I'm also going to give you the contact for the hospital social worker. If someone tries to move you without your consent, call her." "Not because I expect it, because I like people to have tools." "Tools," I repeated. "That's all I've ever asked for." After she left, the phone vibrated face down. A text from a number I didn't have saved. It read, "Hey man, reminded Kara to send over the comps for your dad's neighborhood. Market's softening, but we can still hit the list by the 28th if we move." It was signed Trey. The name landed like a shoe I'd seen scuff my driveway when my boy learned to say bro. I stared at the message. Trey, of course. I scrolled up. A thread I hadn't read because my phone had been sleeping in a charger basket, my mind elsewhere. Dude, lock it in before he changes his mind. Cash buyer loves these old capes. A second one, the title company asked for a death cert. Do we need that? And a third, older, got a guy who can clean the place for cheap so it shows better. Get your dad out for the weekend and we'll work fast. I read each line twice. Let the words fit into each other like the wrong boards hammered into a frame. Then I took a screenshot, printed it out by sending it to Hank's email with the subject line, "For the file." I breathed slowly. Pace, breathe, decide, act. Not anger, not adrenaline. Execution. Hank texted back a thumbs up and one sentence. Got it. Locking your mailbox now. I smiled. A small twist clicked into place. I wasn't alone in the practical matters. I called Samuel Pike's office. His receptionist remembered my name because Samuel is the kind of lawyer who keeps a small practice and the same staff longer than most. Mr. Miller, she said warmly. Mr. Pike has a slot at 9:30 tomorrow. Teleconference. Okay, perfect, I said. I'll send over documents tonight. Bank alert set Zelle disabled frontline title note Brookside cancellation text from Trey. I want to talk Will's revocable trusts and a notice letter to anyone who might try to lean on my name. She confirmed she'd set up a secure upload link, and Mr. Pike had asked her to tell me he prefers coffee black with a little honey, but he'd bring his own. I laughed for the first time in a long time, briefly and cleanly. I told her to tell him I wasn't hosting yet, so tomorrow was fine. When I hung up, I felt the tempo settle into the middle register that the outline said to aim for steady escalation. In the last 40 minutes, I had put 4 small stones on a scale: Brookside's cancellation, and notes the recorder's confirmation, the title company's nod, the lawyer's appointment. None of them was a storm. Together, they were a forecast. The nurse changed my IV bag. She teased me, saying I was making the phone lines sweat and needed water. She handed me a cup with a lid and a straw. Adulthood, I thought, reduced to kindergarten tools. I sipped. The straw squeaked. You hear a lot behind this curtain, I said. Tell me how many families manage to not break each other when someone in this bed needs help. She looked at me with a kindness I had forgotten existed in strangers. More than you'd think, she said. Fewer than we wish. She finished taping the line and patted my hand like she knew it was not a breakable thing but needed a human signature, a touch of reassurance. You're doing good work today, she added. Paperwork is prayer, I said, and preemption. After she left, I opened the email from Lauren. There was the intake summary, neat and clinical, with my life bulleted as if it were a meeting agenda. Indeed. I printed it to PDF and saved it under a name that told the truth: Brookside referral by Matthew. PDF. I highlighted the line, sale of father's property. I imagined Ellen reading that line and straightening a picture frame on the wall because she needed to fix something. I called Meadows Realty. Pep talk music. A receptionist who sounded 19. She introduced herself as Devin and asked how she could help. I made my voice as friendly as a neighbor leaning over a fence. Devin, good morning. My name is Arthur Miller. I'm calling to ask if an agent from your office has been in contact with my son regarding a potential listing on Maple Street. She chirped that they had a few maples and asked if I had the agent's name. I told her I didn't, but I had a text from a Trey referencing a Kara sending comps. Silence as she scrolled through her phone directory. Kara works here, she said, her voice slowing. Can I ask who you are in relation to the property? I'm the owner, I said gently, and I'm in the hospital. I'm asking you to please make a note in whatever system you use. No listing agreement should be drafted, discussed, or shown to buyers without written consent from me. No lockbox installed, no coming soon signage, no photos, no calls to utilities. This is not a permission. It is a boundary. Deeper silence. Eventually, she said, her voice less perky, more human, that she would make that note and alert Kara. She added an apology for my being in the hospital. Thank you, Devin, I said. You sound like a person who does the right thing quietly. I try, she said, and when the line clicked off, I felt another small stake drive in. I let myself stand inside the emptiness for a minute, not to drown in it, just to measure the room. Men like me process by doing. We also need to stand and look at the studs and say, yes, that wall will hold. The phone buzzed again. Matthew, finally. A text, Dad, why are you calling my contacts? You're making this messy. I read it twice then, once more, to be sure that the words meant what they always meant. Messy equals I asserted control. Messy equals other people saw the shape under the tarp. I type slowly, deliberately, because it's my life, my house, and my name. Thursday is canceled. The title company knows to call me. Lawyer tomorrow at 9:30. You and I can talk after I've spoken with him, not before. 3 dots. They blinked, stopped. A full minute. Then, you're overreacting. I was trying to help. You don't have to make everything a fight. I put the phone face down. I didn't respond. Silence is a tool when yes and no aren't honest options yet. The case manager returned with the hospital social worker, a woman with silver hair and the energy of someone who had coaxed entire families back from cliff edges. She introduced herself as Nora and said she heard I liked tools. I confirmed that I did. She sat legal pad ready. She told me slow and clear that if anyone attempted to move me to any facility without my written consent, I was to tell the nurse to page her, and she would come. She would ask for identification, a copy of the consent, and she would say no on my behalf until I could speak. She added she would put me on a no-phone orders flag, meaning they wouldn't accept verbal instructions from anyone regarding my care. She explained it was unusual but powerful and asked if I wanted that. I confirmed, saying for now we could revisit when my lawyer had stacked the paper. She made a note and tapped her pen twice, little thunderclaps of resolve. She also asked if I wanted my son on my HIPAA disclosure list. She waited. No, I said, and saying it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like the truth given a chair. She then told me they wouldn't discuss my care with him unless I authorized it. She looked at me over the edge of the pad. People will tell you you're being harsh. You aren't. You're being precise. She stood. Call if you need me. I thanked her. She nodded. The door clicked. The IV ticked. The rectangle of light kept moving. I called Lauren back at Brookside to thank her for the number she'd given me. She answered on the second ring. I told her I would likely be fine to go home tomorrow or the next day, and I wanted to thank her for being careful with my life. I also told her I had worked in county maintenance for 30 years, and every ramp I ever built had one rule: don't assume the person you're building it for can't walk on their own. She said she'd remember that, the sound of a lesson she'd earned. You did good work today, I added. You too, she said, and we let the line rest. The rest of the day was small things done right. I set up text alerts on the county property tax portal, so I'd know if anyone tried to change my mailing address. I drafted a short, cold email to Trey. It read, any further discussion about my property finances or care will go through my attorney. Do not contact third parties on my behalf. Remove my name from any communications you've initiated. This is not a conversation, I BCC'd Hank. Hank wrote back, printed. Filed. Around 4. The sky went the color of a metal sink. Rain freckled the window. The sound, clean and familiar, slid me for a moment into a different rain. A different Tuesday. A different me. I let it wash and leave without holding it down like I used to. The past wasn't coming to fix me. It was coming to inform me. At dusk, Matthew called. The air between us cracked before any word did. Dad, he started the syllable loaded with a plea and a performance. This is getting out of hand. No, I said. This is getting in hand. Mine. You can't just cut me out of everything. I haven't, I said. You're still my son. I'm still your father. That hasn't changed. What changes is access. Access is not love. Access is access. This is ridiculous, he said. You're making me look like a... He stopped short of the word, unable to voice his true concern. I haven't made you look like anything I said. I've simply stopped standing in front of you taking the hit. He then asked, can we just talk like normal? We never have, I said softly, the truth. A quiet, undeniable force. There was a long quiet, then timid to the point of honesty. He asked, what do you want from me? To tell the truth, I said. To yourself first, then to me. About what? That you called a care facility before you called a cab. That you picked up comps before you picked up a pen to write down visit dad. That you used the word combative about a man whose worst sin today was asking a title company to call him before putting a sign on his lawn. That you have been training yourself to believe busy is a virtue even when it is only a cover. He swallowed hard enough that I heard it. He then stammered, I thought I was doing the right thing. You thought you were doing the easy thing, I corrected, keeping my voice without edges. There's a difference. What now, he asked, and there it was again. The true question. Now, I said I talked to my lawyer at 9:30. I changed certain paperwork. I built a fence around what's mine. I get better. And you, if you want to show up, not with a plan for my assets, but with time in your hands. 10 minutes, a coffee, a drive to the end of the block. He was quiet for once. He didn't say busy. He didn't say anything at all. I'll try, he said finally. It was a small sentence. It was something. We'll see, I said, not cruel, not bait, just a measurement. Okay, he said. Good night. Good night, Matthew, I said, and this time I didn't hang up first. He did. The line went dead. The silence that followed wasn't louder than sirens this time. It was just quiet, the kind that allows a man to hear his resolve. I turned the lamp off. The room rested. Out in the hall, a code blue was called 3 doors down. Feet moved fast, then slower. Life left and entered places it kept secret. I lay back and felt the ridge of the notebook under my palm like a tool asleep under the bench. The outline said to end this step with an image or a sound that signals change. The rain stopped. The window glass held a thin film of water that caught the last of the city's light. A drop gathered at the bottom edge, fattened, let go, and fell, leaving a clear path behind it. I watched the line it traced clear and clean. Tomorrow, I will put that line on paper. Tonight, I let it mark the glass. The phone buzzed one more time, a soft vibration against the tray. An email from Lauren Peer. Your request. Thursday's evaluation has been canceled. Attached referral summary. Noted decisions by Mr. Miller only. Beneath it, a new email from Samuel's office. 930 confirmed. Secure upload link enclosed. I uploaded everything. Brookside summary, title note, property portal alert, and texts. I labeled the file RH plain offense, PDF, a private joke, a private promise. I closed my eyes. The IV clicked. Somewhere a machine sighed. In my mind, I saw studs standing true and plumb. I saw a gate with a latch that only opened from my side. I saw my house on Maple Street, not as an ATM, not as a line item, not as a plan B, but as the place Ellen painted trim in the spring and Matthew drew dinosaurs on index cards. I didn't owe the dark anything. I owed the light a fair shot. When sleep came, it was an escape. It was a man resting between tasks, one hand still on the tool he would need in the morning. The morning I went home started with a question that sounded like a test I planned to pass. The discharge nurse, a brisk woman with eyes that had seen too many goodbyes, asked me who was driving me. She was flipping through a stack of carbon copies as if my life could be triplicated, neatly filed away. I told her it would be a man who shows up. Hank arrived with black coffee that smelled like a mechanic's shop, strong and honest, and a canvas bag that clinked with an assortment of metallic objects. He put the coffee in my hand and the clinking bag on the chair. He told me it contained a thermos and a handful of common sense. Then he stepped aside and let another man fill the doorway. This man, Mercer, offered a hand the size of a small shovel. He introduced himself as Ray Mercer. Hank, he said, claimed I was stubborn, which was his favorite kind of patient. I recognized him before he said his name. The motor pool had its tribe faces, you remember, because you've seen them under a hood streaked with grease under fire alarms covered in rain. We'd patched more than engines together back when everything felt like it could be mended if you had the right socket wrench. I introduced myself as Arthur, taking his hand. It was a handshake that said more than any speech, a silent declaration that I wasn't carrying this alone. The hook delivered. I let it hold for a second, then breathed a deep, cleansing breath. Ray nodded at the papers in my lap. He said we'd move at my pace, but the hospital wanted me out before lunch. He promised to get me home without making a show. He would walk ahead. Hank would walk behind. If anybody asked questions, he added with a grim look, he'd brought his look. His look was 40 years of telling problems that weren't as big as they thought they were to back down. The nurse ran through the discharge instructions as if reading a recipe: fluids, rest follow-up, no ladders, no arguments, call if the world tilts. I signed where she pointed. She gave me a folder with a smile that had seen every kind of goodbye. She noted I was steady and told me to keep being that. Steady is the point, I said, a quiet conviction. She didn't know that I meant paper as much as pulse, that the stability I sought was not just physical but legal, a fortress built of ink and intention. They wheeled me to the door because that's how the rules work, a formality. The hallway smelled less like bleach and more like coffee, the comforting scent of a world moving on. A television laughed at something nobody said. The elevator dinged as if to bless our timing, a soft chime of release. We stepped outside like men who knew the weather and respected it: cloudy, honest, no promise it would hold. Ray's truck was the kind of rig you only keep if you intend to use it, the good kind, worn but reliable. He opened the passenger door like it weighed, something helped me up with a grip that guided without reminding me I needed guiding, and slid in after tossing my bag behind the seat. Hank took the bench in the back like he'd always sat there, a silent sentinel. I stared at the windshield and felt the world spread out, large and workable, a vast landscape of possibilities. No one said the obvious. We pulled onto Maple Street like we owned at least the right to be on it. "Stop by your place," Hank said as we rolled past the elementary school where Matthew used to run until the sky turned the color of chalk, those carefree days long gone. He explained he'd cleared the stoop, brought in my mail, and put the perishables from my doorstep where they belonged. "What perishables?" I asked, my voice coming out smaller than I liked, a faint echo of my hospital fragility. Ray snorted a dry, dismissive sound. He described a bag with "Get Well Soon" muffins, store-bought plastic still on. He flicked his turn signal and pointed to a business card tucked in the storm door. "Sorry I missed you, Kara. Let's chat listings." He handed it over without looking. The card was glossy and sure of itself, an arrogant little rectangle. I slid it into the discharge folder without ceremony. "Tools," I said. "Thank you." We turned into my driveway. The maple that gives the street its name was already letting go of a few early leaves, rogue scouts checking the ground for the rest. The house looked like itself, familiar and stoic. The porch light was still on from Hank's last visit. One shingle lifted at the corner like a cowlick, a railing I'd meant to repaint in May when the budget stopped coughing, when the constant drain of Matthew's needs paused for a breath. My chest tightened at the sight, not because it looked neglected, but because it looked like it had been waiting on me, waiting for me to stop pretending it didn't need me, to stop ignoring its quiet pleas. They helped me out of the truck. I stood for a second with my palm on the hood, feeling the hum die, letting my balance catch up to my body. "No rush," Ray said, as if reading a gauge, understanding the need for a moment of quiet reacquaintance. Inside, the air had the smell of a house that knows its own story. A little dust, a little coffee, a little lemon from the last time I'd wiped down the counter and pretended the grief in the corners was just shadows. Hank set the mail on the table. He had separated it into stacks without tearing my life into categories I wasn't ready to use: bills, flyers, and personal. He slid the "Get Well" muffins across with 2 fingers, a dismissive gesture. He explained they were from the church down the hill, noting their kindness outran their recipes. We stood there like 3 tradesmen on a job site survey: first, then do. I put both hands on the back of a chair and listened. The house breathed a little. The refrigerator clicked. Somewhere, a neighbor's screen door answered a question nobody asked. "All right," Ray said, clapping his big hands once the sound echoing in the quiet. "Hank says you got a lawyer at 9:30 tomorrow. Today is for staging." "Staging?" I asked, a faint smile touching my lips, despite myself a flicker of genuine amusement. "For your recovery," he said. "And for your rights. We put certain things where they belong. We get certain things out of the wrong hands. And we make it so if somebody tries a fast one, the house itself tells on them." He reached into the clinking canvas bag and pulled out a small lockbox, a spiral notebook with a hardback cover, a package of those bright orange document stickers, and a box of cheap ballpoint pens. Then came a small camera in a brown box, the kind you stick by the door and forget, and a set of motion sensors shaped like soap. He set them on the table like tools in a line, each waiting its turn, its purpose clear. "Who told you to bring all that?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Nobody," he said, a wry grin on his face. "Experience. People get sick and families get ideas. We're gonna put your ideas first." Hank brewed coffee like a man who knows his way around someone else's kitchen, moving quietly, not asking where anything was and finding it anyway. He handed me a mug that warmed both of my palms, a simple gesture of comfort. He told me they were here until I told them not to be, and they'd leave the minute I said so. I acknowledged his words, and that sentence, I realized, did more for my blood pressure than the pills in the discharge folder. We started with small things. That's how you build the day you can live inside of. Ray swapped out the screws on the strike plate of the front door for longer ones, the kind that bite deep into the stud and make the jam an argument you're ready to have a barrier built of reinforced steel. Hank took my spare keys and labeled them in his neat caps Arthur. Front back garage. He handed me my set with a tag that said home, because sometimes you need to read the obvious to be reminded of what is truly yours. I sat and worked on the paper, placing bright orange stickers on the folders that mattered: birth certificates, deed insurance, IRA statements. I slid the business card from Kara into a plastic sleeve and wrote on it with a Sharpie, "Do not contact without written consent from owner." Then I stuck it in the front of a new file labeled Meadows Activity, a folder dedicated to documenting the intrusion. I printed the texts from Trey using Hank's little portable printer, which he had, because of course he did, and put them behind the card. The evidence looked ridiculous until you remembered that a stupid thing, a small, seemingly insignificant detail, becomes a powerful thing when it is documented, when it is given weight and legitimacy. My pacing slowed a careful, steady burn of tasks and breaths. We didn't talk about feelings. We talked about measurements, about concrete facts. Around noon, Hank stepped out to the porch to answer his phone. I watched him through the screen door. He nodded, then nodded again, then laughed like something good had been delivered where it belonged. When he came back, he had that look men get when a plan's first nail sings when the initial step proves successful. He explained that was Grace Chen, the branch manager at First Central. He'd asked her to check my note about in-person changes, and she had it flagged for her desk. Nobody, he assured me, would touch anything without me. She said she'd stay till 6 if I wanted to stop by on the way from the lawyer tomorrow. Grace, I repeated, putting the name into the ledger that lived in my head. Thank you. He waved it off, explaining she was in his wife's Bible study in 2098 and still owed them for the time he fixed her water heater. That's how towns work, he said. Debts are paid in favors and apples and signatures at closing. Ray put the little camera by the front window where it faced the porch and the approach. No spying, he said, his voice. A warning and a reassurance. No sound, just movement, date time. If somebody slides a lockbox on your door while you're asleep, we'll have a picture of the hand that did it. I signed into the app with a password I wrote on paper and then put in the back of the new hardback notebook with clear tape. That notebook, I decided, would live in a drawer no one would think to open. I wasn't building a fortress. I was building common sense into a house that had been treated like a collection of sentimental rights instead of legal ones. Hank handed me an envelope with rounded corners. From your mailbox, he said. Inside were 3 pieces of mail that mattered, and 5 that didn't. One mattered more than the others, a letter from Beacon Mutual, the IRA custodian, addressed to me with a gentle scold, "Review your beneficiaries." I pulled the form. It had blank lines under primary and contingent. I let the lines breathe. Not today. Tomorrow. Not because I was afraid to fill them, but because I wanted to do it with my mind and not my scar, with clarity, not raw emotion. What else? Ray asked, scanning the room with a contractor's eye that had seen corners muddled with stubbornness and corners muddled with denial. Inventory, I said. Not for a fight, for a record. Smart, he said. People try to stage their loved ones' homes by removing what they don't like. They call it decluttering. The law calls it something else when nobody asked for it. We walked through the house. We didn't touch the tender things, the framed photos, the small trinkets Ellen had collected. We wrote down the things that would be missed if somebody made them not exist. Tools in the garage, serial numbers, where we could find them, the old mahogany clock that Ellen loved for its imperfection, the 2 fishing rods I had left on there, hooks the spring before Matthew's tuition swallowed my hobby, the box of papers in the hall closet with silver tabs Hank had already pulled to the front. It was a list that looked boring until you imagined holes appearing where the words were supposed to be, gaps in the narrative of my life. In the bedroom, Ray paused at the dresser. The top left drawer was half open the way it always was because the runner stuck. He didn't look inside, respecting the private space. He just knocked twice on the wood, a quiet acknowledgement of the unseen without naming it. "You want a chain on that front door?" he asked, bringing us back to business. Not to keep a battering ram out, but to keep a polite person honest, to clearly define the boundary. "Do it," I said. He did, and the chain's little slide made a sound like something remembering its purpose, a quiet click of rediscovered resolve. The next twist arrived small and perhaps only significant because of what it confirmed. On the kitchen counter, under a magnet that said "Stay Kind" in a font Ellen would have approved of, sat a sticky note I hadn't noticed. It read, "Kara dropped by. Said she knew you from the community board. Asked about cleaning up the porch. I told her to leave a card. Mrs. Lance. Mrs. Lance lives across the street and spends her afternoons reading the community board like scripture, an unofficial neighborhood watch." I called her. "Arthur," she answered, surprise and warmth in equal measure in her voice. "Do I need to bake something? Only if you want a muffin to have a friend," I said, a rare attempt at humor. "Quick question. When did Kara drop by?" "Did she come onto the porch?" "She did," Mrs. Lance said, 2 days ago. I was watering my peonies and she waved and said, "We're helping a family get their property ready, just making sure it doesn't get littered with flyers." I told her Maple Street doesn't litter itself. "Thank you, Mrs. Lance," I said. "If she comes back, tell her the owner is home and he prefers to speak for himself." "Oh, I will," she said loud enough that I imagined Kara feeling the rebuke through a window. I hung up and wrote her name in the notebook next to the entry for Kara's card. Witnesses don't need to be sworn in by a judge. They need to be known in a neighborhood. We ate sandwiches Hank had brought because men like us forget to eat when we're building fences. The bread was soft and the mustard was loud and the meat was the kind you only buy when you know what you're doing in a deli. We didn't talk about Matthew. We didn't have to. Every measured act had been an answer to a question he hadn't asked. After lunch, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone and the hardback notebook and sketched out the afternoon rest, then call Samuel's office to confirm the secure upload worked and ask if he preferred witnessing in person or remotely. Make a list of accounts to check with him: pension, IRA, insurance, property, title, will, and healthcare proxy. Write down the word trust and put a question mark after it. I plan to remove it tomorrow. Write down Community Fund Ellen and let the letters sit on the page like a fresh coat of paint, a new purpose emerging. Ray installed the camera and synced it to my phone. He held the screen so I could see the porch from the perspective of the house. I watched a leaf skitter across the porch and felt a kind of peace I hadn't felt since before the phone call at Street Mary's. This was not paranoia. This was visibility. "You want me to change the mailbox lock now or after your nap?" Hank asked. "Now," I said. "I'll nap better." He nodded, took his tool roll, and went out whistling. The sound came through the screen like a promise that normal things still existed. Ray sat across from me and took a sip of coffee that had lost its heat, but kept its purpose. He watched me watch the porch on the little screen. "You know what I think busy is?" he asked. "A habit," I offered. He smiled. "A costume. People wear it when they're ashamed of the silence." I rolled the thought around in my mind. "He's not a villain," I said, surprising myself by defending the boy I'd also been documenting, carefully collecting evidence against. "He's a man who learned my best generosity without my worst fear. He thinks love is a kind of quiet that erases, not a quiet that records." "Then teach him," Ray said, not unkindly. "Not with speeches, with boundaries." "I am," I said, "and I hate that it feels like punishing a child when it's just saying, 'That's the edge of the yard.'" Ray leaned back and let the chair creak. "When my oldest tried to sell my boat while I was on a job in Wichita, I didn't yell," he said. "I moved the title into a trust and put the boat in my sister's barn for a year. He learned that things have names and owners. Then I took him fishing, and we talked about wind." "How is he now?" I asked. 41, he said, grinning. "Thinks he invented boundaries. Calls me to brag about saying no. It's a good problem to have." We let the laugh move through the house and dust a little. I lay down for an hour while Hank and Ray did the kind of work you only notice if it's done wrong. When I woke, the chain on the front door had learned its new job. The mailbox key didn't feel like the old one. The little camera had already seen a squirrel consider a career in real estate and move on. I felt human enough to stand without thinking about it, and sat again because thinking is what was going to keep me standing. Before they left, Hank set his big hand on my shoulder. 9:30, he said. "I'll drive you to Samuel if you want to look him in the eye when you sign. Or I'll sit at the branch with Grace while you talk on the phone. Or I'll sit here and make sure no one turns your porch into a flyer rack. Your call." I told him I'd make it in the morning. Choice felt like oxygen, a fresh breath. Ray stood by the door, one hand on the new chain. "You're doing it right," he said. "Not angry, not panicked. Precise. Feels like anger sometimes," I admitted. "Anger's just energy without a plan," he said. "You've got a plan. Let the energy be a motor." They left the porch light on because I asked them to. They closed the door with the care of men who knew doors were more than wood. I watched them get in the truck and let the silence fill the house. Not the siren kind, the kind that lets you hear your mind. I made tea because Ellen would have said coffee does its job and then leaves you with the shakes. The kettle clicked. The steam fogged the window in a shape that looked like a map. I touched it with a finger and wrote a single word in the fog. Enough. The heat erased it in a second. Sometimes that's the point. You write it in yourself, not on the glass. The phone chimed. An email from Samuel's office. Upload received. Reviewed prelim. Tomorrow we'll draft one updated will with specific bequests. 2 revocable living trust for house and non-qualified accounts. 3 beneficiary change forms for IRA insurance. 4 HIPAA and healthcare proxy updates. 5 notice letters to title, realty, bring ID, bring patience. I smiled at the last line. The man knew his audience. I texted Hank. 930, confirmed after Grace at the branch. "Bring that printer again," he replied with a check mark, like a man who trusts his handwriting more than emojis but knows the little symbols get the job done. I walked slowly to the front door and slid the chain into place. It made a sound that was not aggressive. It was the sound of a boundary that wasn't a threat. It was a statement. I turned off the porch light and then turned it back on again. Not because I couldn't decide, but because I could. Maybe I would leave it on for a few nights. Not a warning. Welcome to the right people. I sat at the table and opened the hardback notebook. I made 2 columns. On the left, tomorrow. On the right, after. Under tomorrow, I wrote S. Pike 930 Grace flags, verbal PW beacon forms, perennial forms, insurance forms, property portal alerts confirm. Brookside file received Meadows Devon note, added title Eric note Nora hospital flag. Under after, I wrote community fund Ellen House trust inventory USB photo scan box garage lock attic check safe combination chain. I closed the notebook and set the pen across it like a latch. The rectangle of afternoon had crawled away to wherever rectangles go at the end of a day. The maple leaf outside trembled and held. I knew exactly where part 6 would begin me, at a table with Samuel paper spread like lumber building, a thing that looked boring until it held a roof. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, I let the house reacquaint itself with me. I ran my hand along the railing. Ellen had painted the spring before the chemo started, and felt the brush strokes under the gloss, and thought of a watch with a cracked face, and a boy who might still learn what time island. I didn't practice speeches. I didn't rehearse pain. I did the small thing I knew how to do when everything else felt too big. I washed the coffee mugs. I dried them. I put them in the cabinet where they belong. In the quiet, the new chain clicked softly when the night air moved the door a fraction. It sounded like a heartbeat from wood. It sounded like a plan learning how to be a life. The phone buzzed once with a text from a number that hadn't earned a name yet. It read, "Heard you're home. If you need help clearing out old stuff, I've got a crew. We can do it this weekend. Cash is fine. T." I saved the number under a contact that told the truth Trey do not answer. Then I put the phone face down and smiled at my restraint. Silence is not surrender. It's a tool. I turned off the kitchen light and let the porch light do the rest. The IV clicks of the hospital had become the tick of the kitchen clock Ellen bought at a yard sale for $5 years ago. Each tick was a permission. Each tick was a stud. Each tick said, "Stay the course." In the dark, I said her name once, not to bring her back, but to remind myself of the person I promised to be when she left. "Ellen," I said to the railing, "I'm doing the work." Outside, a car passed at the legal speed limit. Inside, a chain held a door that didn't need holding. Tomorrow we'll start the legal part of the fence. Tonight I slept in my bed in my own house with my plan, and the kind of friends who don't wear capes but know where the studs are. The day I armed myself with paper started with the porch camera catching Mrs. Lance's cat, considering a career as a raccoon. It pawed at the doormat, sniffed the daisies in the chipped blue pot, then stared straight into the lens as if to say, "You watching, I was not, I knew watching for cats." I was watching for patterns, for intrusions, for the subtle shifts that indicated a plan at work. I poured hot water over a tea bag and watched the steam rise in a tight column, a fragile temporary pillar against the morning chill. The house was quiet in that way. I'd missed the appliances doing their small, honest jobs without complaint. The floorboards letting you know exactly where you stood, a familiar groan underfoot. My suit jacket, still faintly smelling of mothballs despite its recent airing, looked like it had been waiting for an occasion. Today wasn't one. Today was a task, a necessary, painful excavation. Hank knocked and didn't wait for an answer, a familiarity born of decades of shared mornings. He came in with the printer bag, that canvas sack clinking with tools and practicalities and the look men wear when they've already measured the day in their heads, assessing its demands, its potential challenges. He asked if I was ready. I told him I was as ready as I'd ever be, tucking my ID insurance card and a neat stack of folders into the canvas tote we'd labeled documents with an orange sticker. Not because the label made it official, but because it made it undeniable. I slipped Ellen's photograph into the notebook's back pocket. Not for sentiment, I told myself, but for the aim, for the unwavering purpose. We drove without the radio, the silence in the truck companionable. Maple Street shrugged off a few more leaves, as if to show me what letting go looked like when it was natural, when it was part of the cycle. The law office was in a converted Victorian, the color of overcast, sensible gray with crisp white trim. It was funny, I thought, that the place where people came to fix the messes of their lives looked like a house that had never had one. Inside, the waiting room smelled faintly of lemon oil and old books. a lamp with a green shade making a circle of light on an oak table. Everything was neat, precise, like a thought you've held long enough to have language for. Samuel Pike came out with a legal pad and a pen, a tall, spare man with kind eyes that didn't miss much. He tapped his pen twice, a familiar metronomic greeting. He greeted me by name, noting I looked steadier than the last time he'd seen me. He acknowledged Hank with a nod, then returned his gaze to me. He suggested we make this day useful. His office had a window that looked at a tree that had the decency to be exactly where it was planted, unwavering. He didn't sit behind his desk. He took the chair beside me at the conference table, paper between us instead of wood, a gesture of partnership. He outlined his plan with a calm authority, laying out a stack of pristine papers so clean you could level by it. He explained we would build a revocable living trust with me as the trustee. We would draft a pour-over will that would scoop anything I forgot into that trust. We would update my healthcare proxy and HIPAA so the right person could be in the room and the wrong person could knock. We would change beneficiaries where beneficiaries needed changing. We would write one letter that told people who made money off momentum that I didn't move without lifting my own feet. And then he added we would get lunch. Sounds like a day, I told him. He slid the first sheet toward me, title at the top, the Arthur Miller Revocable Living Trust, dated today's date. Some people gave their trusts fancy names, he remarked, but he found the ones with the owner's name got listened to. I told him I'd had enough of people not listening and plain was fine. He continued explaining I would be the trustee now, and for the successor trustee, for when I couldn't do the job I needed to tell him my choice. I could choose a person or an institution. Institutions, he noted dryly, didn't get pneumonia. People showed up at funerals. Hank, I said, without thinking the name, a steady, unwavering truth. Hank didn't flinch, which was precisely why I'd said it. I added that if Hank said no, we'd make the bank do it. Hank smiled a small, private smile and shook his head, stating he didn't say no to things like that. Samuel nodded, confirming Hank was the first successor. He suggested we name a second someone not in the blast radius of my life. I suggested Samuel himself, a flicker of my old humor. He raised an eyebrow, noting a conflict of interest unless I wanted to pay him to talk to himself, but offered his firm's fiduciary arm as a backup if I wanted a professional to be the adult, if all the adults got tired. Do it, I said. We would retitle the house to the trust, he explained, moving to the next paper. The deed would read from Arthur Miller, an unmarried man, to Arthur Miller, as trustee of the Arthur Miller Revocable Living Trust. It kept my control, kept my privacy. It made it harder for anyone to put a for sale sign on my lawn while I was taking a nap. He added a subtle acknowledgement of Matthew's attempts. Harder is good, I confirmed. He drummed his fingers lightly on the table. Bank accounts, he continued. We could either title them in the name of the trust or make them payable on death to the trust. Since I like to walk in and talk to Grace, he suggested we do POD and keep management simple. The IRA, he noted, was its own animal. We would change the beneficiary to either the trust or to whomever I wanted directly. I explained that my wife's name still hung over that money in ways that mattered to me. I had been thinking of a scholarship. Ellen had worked at the clinic. She cared about kids who needed bandages and books. I asked if we could write most of the IRA to a fund in her name at the community foundation. Samuel's pen stopped tapping. The corner of his mouth ticked up. He simply said yes. He explained we would name the community foundation as a beneficiary of the IRA, a percentage I would decide restricted to the Ellen Miller Nursing and Health Scholarship Fund to be created by a separate gift agreement. The remainder, he suggested, could go to a discretionary trust for Matthew, with a spendthrift clause which would give my successor trustee power to distribute for health, education, maintenance, and support without handing him a blank check and a shovel. Hank breathed out like someone had just confirmed the existence of gravity. I looked at the line where my son's name might go, a conditional, carefully measured allowance, and the line where my wife's would live again in bright, purposeful ink. 80% to the foundation, I said. 20% to a discretionary trust for Matthew. I added that he would call it punishment. Samuel, unflinching, replied that it wasn't. It was a seatbelt. People hated them, he observed, until the second they needed them. He made a note. Insurance, same percentages, he asked. Yes, I confirmed. And remove Matthew as contingent for anything where his being second encourages him to be first. Samuel didn't comment. He was a good lawyer. Healthcare proxy and HIPAA came next. He asked who got the right to hear what I didn't want to say in the hall. Hank, I said. Nora, the hospital social worker, as a backup. She understands the difference between harsh and precise. Durable power of attorney. He asked, his pen hovering, if I wanted to give someone the keys to my financial engine now, or make it spring when 2 doctors said I couldn't drive? I sat with that question, the echo of Matthew's voice, busy like a coin hitting a jar. The polite bullets of Brookside Kara's glossy card. Trey, a cash buyer who loves these old capes. Springing, I said. Narrow bills, taxes, beneficiaries, no changes, no gifts to himself, no changes to titling, and the password that keeps those doors locked goes in the trust binder, not on a post-it under a plate. Samuel wrote quickly and neatly. No gift provision, no beneficiary changes, no self-dealing springing upon certification by 2 physicians. He slid the draft for signatures later after they printed. He laid a single page on top of the stack, the letter. He told me, I didn't have to write this, but when families went to war, the court liked to hear in the quiet voice of the person who's not here anymore. I picked up his pen and wrote in my own hand, if love looks like access to you, this will feel like subtraction. It isn't. It is the only addition that counts respect. I am not leaving you less. I am leaving you only what you can carry without breaking yourself or others. Arthur. That'll do. Samuel murmured like a man checking a level and seeing true. My pacing the flutes in my chest quieted. Samuel scanned me over like a foreman. He said we could sign the healthcare documents now, and that notaries would be in at 10. The trust and deed would be signed after they printed. The deed, he explained, they would e-record, noting the filing fee was a rounding error on one bad decision. Make the error small, I said. We worked the list. He called his paralegal, who printed and tabbed with a speed that implied she liked her job. I signed HIPAA releases as if placing names on a guest list at the door of a room where truth would be said, even if it had to be whispered. I initialed the no phone orders language he suggested I add to my binder, my rule, my fence. The notary came in with kind eyes above a mask looped around one ear. Her stamp sounded like someone setting a jar lid just tight enough to keep the preserves safe. The first twist of the day arrived sideways, uninvited, and right on time. As Samuel handed me the draft of the pour-over will, my phone buzzed with an alert I would have missed if we hadn't set the right dials. Property tax portal request to change mailing address received. Under it, a link to approve or deny. I tapped deny. The screen asked why. I chose owner did not request, and watched the confirmation spin into a green check mark. 2 seconds later, a second alert bank profile attempted online address change blocked flagged for review. Samuel raised an eyebrow. They're moving fast. They're moving on habit, I said, heat, leaving my voice as quickly as it rose. I've been available for too long. Print those, he said to his paralegal through the open door, add to the file. He turned back to me. This is exactly why we're doing this now. People confuse proximity with permission. Busy, I said, not as an accusation, but as a diagnosis. We signed the trust. The notary stamped. The paralegal slid tabs. Samuel slid the deed forward like a plank across 2 sawhorses. This, he said, tapping the legal description that made my house into letters, is where you stop being an easy target. He handed me the pen. I signed my name in a hand steadier than it had been the day before in a hospital bed. When we finished, he scanned and e-recorded it while I watched the status bar creep. There, he said a minute later, recorded. Owner you as trustee. Anyone who tries to sell this house without your consent is going to run into a wall with your name on it. We sat for a moment in the quiet that follows real work. Then Samuel spoke more softly. One more thing. I want to tell you something a colleague told me last year when his dad was in the hospital. His brother called my office asking about transferring a house with a beneficiary deed. We don't have those in this county. Even if we did, the only signature we care about is the owner's. Your son called a bank in May. He called a facility last week. He may call somewhere else next. He'll learn this lesson the way most of us do, by being told no when we deserved it earlier. He put his pen down. You're not taking something from him. You're taking something back for you. I know, I said. It felt like picking up a tool that had my initials worn into the handle. We left Samuel's at 11 with a manila envelope that had weight and intention. Hank drove us straight to First Central. Grace Chen met us at the door, her mask looped at one ear like she'd just stepped away from a protocol. She greeted me by name, this time like we already knew each other, ushering us to her desk without sending us past a queue that would have eaten an hour. I told her I wanted to put flags on my accounts, update my alerts, and set pod designations to my trust. And I wanted a verbal password that meant she called me not a person who said they spoke for me. She smiled behind her eyes, agreeing they had a few tools and it was time to use all of them. We added the verbal password Samuel and I had chosen earlier, Ellen's middle name. We set text alerts for cash withdrawals over $50 and external transfers. We disabled Zelle so thoroughly it looked extinct. We added Hank as a trusted contact without giving him access to a single dime. We removed Matthew as an authorized contact. He had never been not officially, but we scrubbed any notes that mentioned his name from a year ago when I'd linked his rent account. Grace printed out a POD to trust form and slid it to me with a pen attached to a chain. I signed where the orange flags told me to. Another alert pinged on Grace's screen. She turned it so I could see online address change. Attempt failed. IP 192. 20XX device. iPhone time 1108. She clicked a button. She said they would put a 90-day hold on online profile changes, and if I wanted to make an address change in that period, I had to come to her. I confirmed I would see her in person every time. She added one last thing I didn't know existed. She said they could put a note that when someone calls claiming to be me, they ask them a question not on any form. I smiled. I told her to ask me the street my wife loved to walk and supplied the answer Willow. She typed it. She said it seemed right. We left the bank with a folder that matched the law office's 2 pieces of paper that belied their importance and a cashier's check made out to me as trustee for $10 Samuel's token to open the trust account when I was ready. Hank slapped the dashboard in a good way. Lunch, he asked. Lunch, I said, and we got sandwiches from a place that charges a fair price for bread and doesn't pretend to have invented mustard. We ate in the truck like men who had drywall dust on their souls. I checked the porch camera out of habit. An agent with a blonde ponytail walked past my steps without looking in. The camera caught her profile and the way she didn't take a card from her bag this time. I'm going to call the community foundation, I said, wiping my hands. If I'm going to use Ellen's name, I should tell them the why before the how. We parked in the shade of the county courthouse and I dialed. The receptionist's voice held that mix of warmth and detail that means you work where people ask you to hold legacies gently. She put me through to a woman named Anita who ran donor services. She introduced herself as Anita, and after I explained my intent, she told me she knew my wife. She said Ellen took her blood pressure every spring when she got white coat syndrome and wouldn't admit it, and they called her the calm corner. Something in my chest loosened without breaking. I told her that sounded like Ellen. Anita explained the fund options like someone describing different kinds of nails to a man who knows what he's building. We settled on a named scholarship for students from our county going into nursing or allied health. She said I could start the fund with a small gift now if I wanted, and the beneficiary designations would pour the bulk later. She offered to send me a draft agreement, reiterating no pressure and that they moved at my pace. I gave her my email and told her to put Ellen's name in the title, exactly as she'd signed it on the note she left on the refrigerator, the second spring of chemo, Ellen Marie Miller. We said goodbye and I sat with the phone in my lap heavier than the object deserved to be. Hank nodded at nothing. Good work, he said, which is the only praise I trust. The afternoon was for small hinges. Back home, I set up informed delivery with the postal service so I'd know who thought my mailbox was a suggestion. I froze my credit at the 3 bureaus with a policy that nothing in my name moved without my say-so. I enrolled in the county's property fraud alert program, a simple email subscription that would scream if anyone recorded anything with my parcel number on it. I logged into Social Security and added 2-factor authentication the way you add a deadbolt, not because you think someone is coming tonight, but because you respect what's inside. Ray came by with a spare padlock for the garage and oil for the door hinges. He oiled them like a prayer he didn't say out loud. He asked if I'd seen Trey. No, I said. I saw his idea of efficiency. He grunted. Efficiency is a great way to misname cruelty. We put the manila envelopes in the lockbox and slid the box onto the highest shelf in the hall closet behind a stack of board games with Ellen's laugh still caught between their lids. I wrote a list of what was in the box and taped it to the inside of the closet door at eye level. Hank stuck another orange sticker on the outside of the box, because sometimes bright is the point. The house felt different by late afternoon, not because of a smell or a piece of furniture moved, but because it had a memory again, fresh and legal and not negotiable. Matthew texted at 4:30. He asked if I had changed bank stuff because he couldn't get through. I typed back that I had changed my life and the bank was part of it. I told him the lawyer at 9:30 went well, and to call tomorrow afternoon if he wanted to talk like men who tell the truth. He didn't reply. The silence didn't have teeth anymore. It was just the kind of quiet that lets you listen to the clock. Hank left at 5 with the promise he'd be back at 9 to walk me to the branch if I wanted to shake Grace's hand again. I told him I might. He said he liked a branch that knew his name and loped off with the printer bag in a wave. I made dinner that would have embarrassed any cook, but kept a man alive. Scrambled eggs toast and a sliced tomato that had lived on the windowsill long enough to know the light. I ate at the table and read the draft fund agreement Anita had sent. Under purpose, I wrote to honor Ellen Miller Hayes's work at Dr. Hargrave's clinic and invest in hands that steady others. The last twist of the day came so quietly I almost missed it. An email from the title company owner acknowledgement note added per request. Contact list updated. Under it, a second email from Devin at Meadows note added to CRM. Owner requires written consent for any activity. Lockbox install strictly prohibited without owner present sign-off. She'd CC'd Kara. No reply yet. I read those lines and felt the peculiar satisfaction of seeing your boundaries quoted back to you. As evening turned the kitchen windows into mirrors, I took the notebook from the drawer and wrote down everything I'd done in a plain list. No flourishes, no heroics. Trust signed, deed recorded. HIPAA healthcare proxy updated. Durable POA springing narrow. IRA insurance beneficiary plan 80% to Ellen's fund. 20% to discretionary trust for Matthew. Bank flags alerts POD to trust verbal password Ellen's middle name. Property tax portal address change attempt denied. Bank online address change attempt blocked. Informed delivery. Credit freeze. Property fraud alert. Letters to title. Realty sent notes added. Community foundation fund agreement in draft. Lockbox organized. Inventory started. Boundaries taught in sentences no longer than a nail. Underneath alone on the last line, no noise, only facts. The night arrived like someone who knows your house code and doesn't slam the door. I turned off the porch light, then turned it on again, smiling at the habit I'd made of reminding myself I'm allowed to choose. The camera watched the street the way a sentinel watches, not to be brave, but to be accurate. I sat with a cup of tea and Ellen's picture. I told her we did the boring work today, the kind that keeps roofs on. I imagined her saying I would have liked Anita, and that Anita remembered her calm corner. I imagined Ellen's smile, the one that didn't show all her teeth, and said, exactly so. Before bed, I checked the porch camera one more time. The frame showed the quiet geometry of my steps. The railing Ellen painted the maple across the way, throwing leaves like slow confetti. A car rolled by, not too fast, not too loud. My phone buzzed. One last message from an unfamiliar number. If you want to sell without the hassle, we can close in 7 days. Cash as is. R. I saved the number as Roach do not answer, then deleted the thread. Not because I feared it, but because clutter isn't just things on a counter, it's words you don't need. In the bedroom, I put the manila envelope on the chair where Ellen used to lay her sweater, not a shrine, but a staging area. I slid the chain on the front door with a motion that felt less like defense now, and more like punctuation, a final statement. The house made the small noises it makes when it's content, the water heater sighing, the clock practicing honesty. I lay down not to escape but to rest between tasks. Tomorrow would bring the first real reaction from Matthew to a world that no longer rearranged itself to suit his calendar. He would test the fence. I would not raise my voice. I would point to the posts and say, they're sunk. That's all. If he asked where the gate was, I'd show him. If he asked for the keys to something that wasn't his, I'd show him the letter with his name in the margins and tell him the one truth I had earned with stamps and signatures. Love is not access. Love is care. This every line, every alert, every notarized impression was cared for. The dark didn't feel like an enemy anymore. It felt like a room with the lights off that you know well enough not to stub your toe in. The porch light glowed for the right reasons. The chain held for the right reasons. The clock ticked steady as the IV used to be, but this time measuring a life I was building on purpose. The first call came before the kettle clicked. My porch camera had caught nothing more sinister than Mrs. Lance's cat practicing burglary on a moth. The house was doing its small, honest sounds. I just reached for the chain on the door to slide it open to morning air when the phone buzzed with a name I knew too well. Dad, what did you do? Matthew's voice came hot, not worried but cornered. He explained that his application had blown up, that they had said the cosigner was removed and verbal override disabled. He described standing there while a guy with a goatee explained it to his boss like I'm 12. The hook delivered itself. I let the chain rest, half slid the little metal tongue hanging like a thought you hadn't decided whether to say. I told him I hadn't done anything to his application. I had done something to my life. He laughed, one note brittle. He told me not to parrot my lawyer at him. He accused me of changing the bank, of setting a flag. He said the dealership couldn't finalize his lease because he no longer had cosigner approval, and asked if I had any idea how that looked. I told him I did. I said it looked like a 30-year-old man signing his name under his obligations. He started to say I was supposed to then froze on the pronoun like it might bite him. I asked gently, supposed to what? Be a wallet. Be a ladder you don't see until it isn't under your feet. Silence. Then the scrape of keys on a counter, on his end, the sound of someone getting angrier because the room isn't rearranging itself fast enough. He said I could have told him. I told him I had for years, with every yes and every check, that there would come a day I couldn't be on the floor. He just hadn't believed me. He exhaled the way people do when the argument they brought doesn't fit through the door. He snapped an okay. He then accused me of tanking a listing, saying Kara claimed my bank and title company had flagged the owner. He then asked why I had put a red laser on my door. I told him I put my name on my door and my trust in my deed. That was all. He tried softening into nostalgia like it was a tool, claiming Kara knew me from the community board and had met me at Sal's once. I then reminded him that Kara was the girl with him at his graduation, the words escaping before I meant to say them out loud. It hit both of us at once, the twist arriving sideways and ringing true. The name I'd kept neutral, a mere detail on a form, was a face from a photo where I'd told myself I was imagining the way she didn't meet my eyes. He then said he didn't have time for this pivoting back to anger, back to the only coat he'd worn enough to not notice its holes. He listed his woes: a product, meeting a car he couldn't pick up, a landlord who wanted to confirm a primary mailing address because I'd flagged some government portal. He accused me of making him look bad. I told him he had made himself look like whatever he looked like when he tried to move another man's house in a week. I then told him to listen, Matthew, and to stop talking to me like I did violence to his day. I had done maintenance to my life. He made a sound I recognized from when he was 16 and the lawnmower wouldn't start, and he kicked the tire and blamed the grass. He asked if I thought I could just cut him out and call it respect. I told him I hadn't cut him out. I had put posts in the ground. If he wanted to stand here, he would stand on my side of the fence. He then told me to forget it, that I was impossible when you get like this, like what I asked. Sober awake, the opposite of unconscious, the line clicked dead. The silence after was not louder than any siren this time. It was the kind that lets you hear the tea kettle finish what it started. I poured water over a bag and watched the dark climb. The porch camera pinged mail carrier at the box hand. Quick cap pulled down a practiced rhythm. The mail slot clanged like a metal thought landing. I set the mug down and went to the door. The chain slid a small punctuation, and I picked up the stack. A fat manila envelope from Samuel Pike, a thin letter from Beacon Mutual, a postcard from the dentist that must have been in the pipeline since before everything changed. I laid Samuel's envelope on the table and let it sit the way you let lumber acclimate to a room before you frame with it. My phone buzzed again, an unknown number. I didn't answer those anymore. The voicemail transcribed itself. It was Jeff from Mayfair Motors wanting to verify my cosigner status for Matthew's vehicle lease. He said they had a note now that said no cosigner owner declines all associations, and asked if that wasn't correct. I smiled, not unkindly, and saved the message to the file I'd labeled "People Who Think I'm a Committee." Hank knocked like a friend, not a cop. 2 quick ones, slow. He stepped into the kitchen and nodded at the envelope like another working man acknowledging good news that would take effort. He greeted me. I told him it was Samuel's work. He set the portable printer on the chair, slung his tool roll on the other, and looked at me with the kind of measuring men do out of respect, not inspection. I confirmed I was good, steady, and that the first blow had landed. He didn't ask me to explain. He poured himself coffee like a man who knows the kitchen, then poured me one without asking. Then folded his big hands around his mug and listened to a house being a house for a moment. He then said we would do this in the right order, paper first, talk later. We opened Samuel's envelope. Inside was the executed trust binder tabs labeled in a teacher's neat hand. A certified copy of the recorded deed with my name as trustee, right where the county had decided to print truth. My updated healthcare proxy and HIPAA. A stack of letters on Samuel's letterhead, the good thick kind that takes a stamp like a handshake, to Frontline Title to Meadows, Realty to Brookside Care, to Riverstone Bank, to Mayfair Motors. Samuel hadn't written fireworks. He had written the law. Please note any request to alter the title list property or obtain financing secured by property at address without the express written consent of Arthur Miller as trustee of the Arthur Miller Revocable Living Trust will be considered fraudulent and referred to authorities. That line did not raise its voice, and that was why it would be heard. We sat at the table like we were in the motor pool again, laying out parts, wiping our hands, doing the job. I signed in the margins where signatures live now, not in blood but in ink. And Hank slid the letters into envelopes and printed labels with a speed that made a man feel like the world still contained competence. The portable printer whirred. A stamp took a corner. We stacked them. It felt like loading a nail gun. The phone pinged. Experian attempt to open credit in your name blocked, freeze active. Underneath another property fraud alert, new document recorded for parcel not yours. I exhaled the habit of checking every shadow for a thief ingrained, and let the idea that some other man's day was going to be saved by a subscription watch over itself. Ray stopped by with a toolbox and the kind of quiet that sits next to you without asking for a chair. He nodded at the envelopes. He said it looked like a delivery. I told him they were the first blows. He grinned. He told me to make them precise. The doorbell rang. The porch camera sent me a clean frame. A woman with a blonde ponytail and a tote bag with Meadows lettered on it stood on my step, gazing at the camera like she'd heard its presence and decided to smile anyway. Kara in person, the girl from a photo, hardened into an agent. She pressed the bell again and glanced at her phone, then tapped a text with a practiced thumb. Hank asked if I wanted him to answer. No, I said. I'm home. I slid the chain, opened the door halfway, and let morning in around the edges. She started her practiced voice, the one that borrows warmth and spends it, saying she was so glad I was home and they must have just missed each other the other day. I told her calmly before she said anything else to look at the camera because it was recording, not to catch her but just to keep this clean. For a second she resented that. Then she adjusted to reality like a good salesperson does, and smiled, for the lens like that had been the plan all along. She said she wanted to clear up a misunderstanding that they had been in contact with my son about helping my family during a stressful time. I'm not a family, I said. I'm a man. Her smile held for the camera, and I saw the effort it takes to keep one on. She said she understood this was difficult, and they wouldn't do anything without my permission, that they were just preparing options. You prepped comps, I said. You pulled a prelim. You left a card. Your guy texted my son to get me out for a weekend so you could clean up the porch. That is not an option. That is a plan. She wilted a fraction, then regrouped. She said they thought. I know what you thought, I said. You thought the way most people think when they don't see a person in the picture yet. You saw a house, a son, a story you've seen before. Here's the part you missed. I'm in the picture. Of course, she said, stepping into a narrower smile. In that case, she added, they could reset. If I was ever interested in selling, they could. Not interested, I said. I will send you a letter from my attorney. It will say exactly what I'm about to say plainly. No listing, no signage, no photographs, no staging, no lockbox, no calls to utilities, no mail forwarded, no change of address, no nothing without written consent from me. This porch and this camera will remind you. Her eyes flickered a small anger at being told where the edge of the yard is. Then something else came, the twist I'd been bracing for. Matthew was under a lot of pressure, she said. He was trying to do right by me. He can do right by me, I said, by showing up with coffee in 10 minutes. Not with a buyer's timeline in your tote. Tell him that. Tell Trey the same. Her face gave Trey away, both that she knew him and that she didn't put him in the category called good news. She said they don't usually coordinate with buyers like that, as if to regain some moral square footage. Then stop, I said, and shut the door gently, the chain sliding with a sound like the end of a sentence. Hank whistled low from the kitchen. Ray chuckled into his toolbox. That was a clean cut, Ray said. No splinters. The phone chimed again. Matthew. Dad, did you just slam a door in Kara's face? I typed back that I closed my door and she would be fine. 3 dots. Then, you embarrassed me. I looked at the word and marveled at how often it disguised itself as truth. You embarrassed yourself, I typed, then deleted it, then wrote, I'm not a co-signer for meetings you schedule for my house. Lunch tomorrow. Neutral ground Sal's. He didn't answer. We mailed Samuel's letters. Hank liked the post office the way some men like churches. He put the envelopes through like blessings. The clerk stamped them, the sound, not unlike a gavel that had decided to be kind. We bought a book of stamps with owls on them because I let myself like one small, unnecessary thing and didn't apologize to the part of me that thinks liking things is how you lose them. Back home, Nora from the hospital called to check on discharge and to remind me that the no phone orders flag would stick until I asked her to lift it. She asked if I had any trouble. I told her a few experiments, all in the past tense. Good, she said. Trouble hates paper. Anita from the Community Foundation emailed a clean draft of the fund agreement with Ellen's name exactly where it belonged. I read the purpose statement out loud, sitting at the table like you read a blessing over soup to honor Ellen Marie Miller's work at Dr. Hargrave's clinic and invest in hands that steady others. Hank listened like a witness. We printed and signed to send back with a small initial check. Samuel had insisted on not letting me forget this wasn't theater. This was the foundation, literal and otherwise. By late afternoon, the day had done the thing days do when you don't waste them. They had shape. I felt tired. The way you feel after excavation, clean, tired. The earth reordered the edges, true. Then the first blow landed, not with paper but with sound. The phone trilled with Matthew's name and I let it go to voicemail because right then I was buttering a piece of toast and my house's smallness felt like safety and I didn't want to bring a storm inside. He left a message anyway, his anger bravely wearing its best tie. He started without preamble saying I won and that he looked like an idiot. Trey was out. Kara was furious. His boss had watched him beg a dealership for 5 extra minutes because his co-signer had fallen off. He was a joke. He asked if that was what I wanted to make him feel small. He questioned why I couldn't just float him for a week, why I had to pull the rug, why I had to do this now when I'm busy. He ended by stating he didn't need a wallet that lectured him on fences. He needed a father who understood he was drowning. I listened twice. The words rearranged themselves. On the third pass, the sentence that mattered floated to the top. I don't need a wallet that lectures me. He didn't hear himself. I did. I sat at the table and put a dot next to the line in the notebook where I'd written, "Wallets don't raise sons." I called him back 5 minutes later, not to mirror his heat, but to offer a cool thing that didn't need his permission. I told Matthew when he answered that I heard his message. I suggested I say this the way I would tell a neighbor so I wouldn't turn it into a father speech. I told him I hadn't pulled a rug. I had stopped being his flooring. There was a difference. I told him I wasn't making him small. I was giving him edges. Swim or don't, but don't call the shore cruel. He laughed, ugly and young. He said I was unbelievable, that I couldn't even pretend I cared how this looked for him. I told him I cared how this was for him. I didn't care how it looked for him in a room where he asked a man with a goatee to let him grow up tomorrow. If he wanted to talk, I told him I'd be at Sal's tomorrow at noon. If he wanted a lecture, I advised him to call a wall. He didn't answer. Neither did I. We let the line stand there until one of us remembered to hang up. It was him. The silence didn't wound. It simply went to work protecting both of us from saying things that would be hard to unsay. Evening came like a friend who knows not to knock. Hank and Ray left when I told them I wanted an hour alone. They didn't make a speech about checking on me. They both simply pointed at the camera app on my phone and at their names in the trusted contact list and at the chain on the door that lived between metaphor and hardware. Hank told me to text if the weather changed. I told him it wouldn't, but I would. I washed the 2 plates we'd used and left them in the rack water, ticking off them like little clocks. Outside, the maple shook itself and let go of one leaf that took too long to decide which way was down. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked like it had opinions about the mail. I sat at the table with Ellen's picture and the draft agreement with her name, to invest in hands that steady others. I traced the letters without touching the ink and let the day fill me in a way anger never does. This was the first blow. Not mine to him. Mine to the story I'd been telling myself about what fathers are required to carry. I had set down a piece of that story. The ground didn't swallow me. It steadied. The porch camera pinged one more time as the light went blue. The frame showed Mrs. Lance crossing the street with a Tupperware. I opened the door before she rang and took it with the right words. "Thank you, but you don't have to." She brushed me off with a flick of her hand, saying she knew I looked like a man who didn't eat dinner on time. She leaned closer, lowered her voice. She added she had told that real estate girl that if she stepped on my porch without a permission slip with my signature on it, she'd read her the HOA bylaws from memory. She laughed, calling it foolish. I smiled in a way that felt like the cheapest, best therapy in town. I thanked her for the casserole and the bylaws. My phone buzzed. Devin from Meadows, the receptionist with the 19-year-old voice, informed me Kara had removed herself from the file, and a new note stated, "Do not contact per owner." I stared at the words and felt the smallest hinge swing somewhere. Not a victory, a removal of noise. The shape under the tarp became a deck that looked like itself. I ate the casserole with a gratitude I remembered from the week after Ellen left, when food tasted like other people's courage. I washed the dish and put it by the door to return. I turned off the kitchen light and let the porch light do what it does, say to the right people, "You can find the door, and to the wrong people we can see you. Before bed, I wrote one line in the notebook under the day's list. First blow, delivered facts, not fury. Then I drew a small box and put a check mark inside it, because sometimes grown men need to tell themselves the simplest truth in the simplest way. You did the thing you said you would. In the distance, I could hear Friday night traffic pull past the high school windows down Laughter, riding the air like something that knew it would be caught. When I lay down the bed, held me like a fact. The chain on the door did its job. The light on the porch did its job. Tomorrow at noon, I'd sit at Sal's in a booth that had survived worse and order 2 coffees and let Matthew choose whether to drink his or spill it. I wasn't nervous. I was a man in a house with studs you could trust paper where it belongs, and a life that finally matched the volume of its name. The first blow had landed, and it had been exactly what I wanted, not a punch. A post, sunk deep steady, ready for the fence to be finished. Outside, the street went quiet in the way it only does when you've earned the quiet. Inside, the clock ticked the way IVs do when you're measuring recovery. The room went soft. The morning would come, and with it the next step. I got to Sal's 10 minutes early because that's what men like me do when the weather looks unpredictable. The bell over the door rang the way it always has, honest, a little tired. The same laminated menus, the same red vinyl booths patched with clear tape that didn't pretend to be anything else. The waitress, Gina, a woman who'd seen a lifetime of small-town dramas unfold in these booths, brought 2 coffees without asking, saying they were on the house. She mentioned my wife used to tip like she was paying forward a secret. I nodded, confirming that Ellen believed caffeine kept the peace. Gina smiled and left me to my corner and my thoughts. The hook arrived in a reflection before the man. In the window, I saw Matthew outside, phone in hand, talking fast to someone who wasn't me, running his free hand through his hair the way he does when he's already decided a conversation is a problem to solve. He came in not with a hello, but with momentum, sliding into the booth and setting his phone face down like an apology he wasn't making. He noted I looked okay, a little surprised, as if my eyebrows were supposed to be stitches and my shirt a hospital gown. He suggested the hospital call was dramatic. I simply stated I was okay and offered coffee. He nodded, and when Gina poured, he quietly offered a thanks like he remembered his mother could hear through the walls. He took a sip and made a face. Gina laughed from 2 aisles over, commenting that it was the same coffee as when he was 12, and it didn't get worse, his mouth just got picky. Matthew didn't rise to it. He reached for his phone, caught himself, and put both hands on the table like he was about to do a push-up. He started by saying yesterday was rough and I had humiliated him and Kara. He stopped, recalculated, and found a better opening, stating he was under a lot of pressure. I acknowledged we both were, and invited him to tell me his. He then laid out his grievances. The lease had fallen through. HR had floated him a week on the rental car, but he couldn't keep it. His boss, he claimed, thought he'd lied, because the dealership guy kept saying cosigner removed. Kara, he added, said she couldn't help anymore because I had lawyered up. Trey was out and claimed I owed him for his time. He told me not to look at him that way, stating that it was just how this works. And on top of it, his landlord had received a notice that his address couldn't be changed without me or something. He concluded I had flipped every switch. I calmly told him I had turned on the lights, that it was a different thing. He took that in with a small flinch. He asked, why now? Why all at once? I told him it was because I almost died. Not cruelly, but as a plain fact. And because 5 minutes after the doctor called him, he had told him to handle it. Then Brookside told me he had booked me a 30-minute slot like I was a meeting. Then Frontline Title told me his name was on a prelim for my house. Then a receptionist named Devin said Kara had put me in a CRM as a lead. I told him I hadn't flipped switches. I had closed a circuit that should never have been open. He stared at the coffee like it held answers. After a beat, he said softly he thought he was helping. He noted I lived alone and I had fallen. He suggested assisted living wasn't prison. I told him I knew the difference, and that he didn't move a man's house before he moved his feet to his bedside. That was the part I explained that wouldn't change even if his plan had worked. He pushed air out through his nose. He admitted he didn't know I was this focused. Alive, I said. Focus comes with it. Gina set a plate of toast between us without comment because she's smart. He took a piece, tore it into careful halves, and didn't eat either. Okay, he said. So what now? You sue me. You cut me out of everything and make your little speech about respect. I told him I didn't sue people I love. I also didn't allow them to write endings that made me into paperwork. Fine, he said, jaw tight. What do you want from me? I told him I wanted him to tell the truth starting in this booth. I asked him directly if he had signed anything with Trey or Kara, if he had put my name on any document, if he had asked someone to notarize a power of attorney. He looked up fast. He said no, too quickly. He then amended, saying he'd downloaded a form, but he hadn't. His phone buzzed under his palm, 2 short vibrations that made him break eye contact. He flipped it, glanced, and in that little slice of attention I saw a preview banner that didn't expect me to be literate. Frontline title POA doc received, requires physician certifications to be valid. The world went quieter by 1 degree. I calmly told him to turn his screen so I could see it. He lifted the phone like a teenager caught in a lie, and to his credit turned it. The email was plain. Attached was a statutory short-form durable power of attorney for Arthur Miller agent Matthew Hayes, with missing certifications for a springing POA requesting advice. Attached signature lines had a scroll that wasn't mine and wasn't trying hard enough to be. That I said evenly is fraud. He denied it too fast, his head shaking. He stammered that it was a template and Trey had said he could get it notarized at the UPS store. I asked if he had. He snapped that, no, they had asked for me. He then claimed he was going to talk to me today and do it the right way. The right way to what I asked. Move my house while I was giving a speech at my own assisted living intake NUM. I told him not to say words like right way when the path he was on was built by shortcuts. Gina refilled our coffees with a radar that knows when conversation needs the sound of something pouring. Matthew swallowed, wiped his palms on his thighs the way kids do after climbing fences, and tried another door. I'm drowning, Dad, he said. You cut lines I was counting on. I needed the car to get to work. I needed the landlord to be off my back. I needed Kara to move the house so I could. So you could, what I asked. Clean up your schedule, not pay a bill. Buy time with my equity. I told him I was going to say a sentence, and I wanted him to hear it as if a neighbor said it, not a father. You used me without asking, and when I stopped being usable, you called that cruelty. He stared at the toast halves. He put one in his mouth, chewed like it hurt, swallowed like it mattered. When he finally looked up, I saw something behind the heat fatigue, maybe, or the interruption of a story he'd been telling himself, a story where I would always choose his ease over my life. You're going to die someday, he said quietly, the words almost a plea. The diner's air changed. The bell over the door became a far sound. I set my cup down very carefully, because what I said next would either be a plank or a match. The difference, I said, my voice low but resonant, is who gets to tell the truth about me while I'm alive. You don't get to practice my funeral. We sat in the silence that a town knows how to make around hard conversations. Gina pretended to wipe a counter for a minute too long. A kid in a high chair banged a spoon on a placemat like an old joke. The light through the windows made a rectangle on the table, and we both pretended not to measure it. His phone buzzed again. He flipped it without looking, and this time I caught the name at the top, Kara. He didn't read it. Maybe he didn't want me to see. Maybe he didn't want to see. He exhaled through his teeth. He said I had set up a scholarship that Samuel had told him, and that I had put 80% of my IRA somewhere he couldn't touch. I told him it wasn't somewhere he couldn't touch. It was somewhere he didn't need to. Ellen, I reminded him, took blood pressures for 30 years and tucked lollipops into coat pockets for kids who cried. That money, I stated, was going where her hands went. That's what I was doing with it. He asked if he got any of it, not even bothering to dress the question as anything else. Yes, I said. 20% inside a trust that releases money when you need it, not when you want it, and never to pay Trey. It's not punishment. It's a seatbelt. He laughed small and mean the way pain is when it's hungry. He accused me of writing him a budget from beyond the grave. No, I said. I built a fence that will outlast me. You can still walk through the gate. He looked away to the door like the exit's geometry might help. The bell rang and I turned out of habit. Hank stood there, nodded at me, and moved to the counter for coffee and a dozen napkins he didn't need. He didn't look over, but I felt steadier knowing he could. That's what allies do. They stand where you don't have to look to know they'd move if you needed them. Matthew, I said, pulling his attention back, I'm not asking you to perform remorse. I'm asking you to come back to the part where you say you called a care facility before you called a cab. Sit with that. Then we can talk like men who tell the truth. He picked up the second half of the toast and put it down again. He stared at the chrome napkin holder and saw something there that I couldn't. Maybe his face at 10 with jelly on his chin. Maybe mine at 53 when I told him we couldn't afford the nicer cleats. Maybe nothing at all. He finally said too quickly to be true that he had a meeting. He stumbled over the corner of the booth, caught himself, and pretended it was Grace. This was great, he said in that tone people use when a date is going to be a story later for someone else. We should do it again. "We will," I said. "When you're ready to be in the room, you're in." He left the bell making a sound like a reminder. Hank brought my check without asking if I needed it. He observed that Matthew looked like he saw the fence. I confirmed he did, and now he'd see if he respected it. Whispers were loud today, Hank added, lowering his voice. He recounted that the church ladies at table 6 had seen a coming soon post on Nextdoor that had disappeared. Mrs. Lance, he added, had told them she'd wear her reading glasses and walk to the courthouse if she had to. He concluded that people were on my side more than I thought. I replied that people liked a story with a fence it told them where to stand. We paid and stepped into the noon air that had decided on warm. On the walk to the truck, a man I'd fixed a boiler for 12 years ago raised a hand. He said he'd heard I was selling and heard I wasn't. He asked which it was. I told him it wasn't. He nodded. "Good," he said. "Houses need the people who know where the creek is." Whispers did their work the rest of the afternoon. At Miller's Hardware, an old foreman named Pete sidled up and asked if I needed boxes. I asked for what. For staying, he grinned and bought me a pack of drywall anchors, saying every house needed them. And I took them the way men take kindness from other men, like a tool you didn't know your toolbox had space for until it does. On the way home, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen since Ellen's funeral. "Ruth," I said, not ready for the sound of my sister's name to be this practical. She started without a hello, saying I had made the church ladies mad. I could hear her smile and her warning both. She said they had called her to ask if I was moving. You know how they are. I told her I wasn't, but I was rearranging. She noted she had heard about a scholarship in Ellen's name, her voice doing a soft thing even over the miles. That she said was the first decision I'd made in 3 years that sounded like me. I invited her to come see me, telling her to bring nothing but stories. She did better than that. She brought a lemon pie that tasted exactly like the summer our father ran a hose into a wading pool and called it a lake. We sat in my kitchen with plates that didn't match because the matching ones went out of fashion before my hands learned to wash what they love. And we told the kind of truths sisters and brothers know how to tell each other without breaking the room. She said I looked lighter and heavier at the same time, which meant she saw the fence and the posts and my shoulders. She asked about Matthew in a way that didn't turn him into a defendant or a saint. I told her enough. She nodded and said he always thought shortcuts were just better paths, and we let the pie do the rest of the talking. At dusk, the phone vibrated with an email from Samuel. FYI, frontline title forwarded a POA to our office, not yours. Incomplete and invalid. No physician certifications. Signature, not yours. I sent a revocation letter anyway to anyone who saw it for avoidance of doubt. Consider recording a notice of trust and a no unauthorized transactions affidavit with the county. Draft attached. He attached a PDF with language that felt like a steel bar laid across a door. I printed it on Hank's portable and put it on the stack for morning errands. The porch camera pinged. I glanced out of habit. Tray hoodie baseball cap posture of a man who lives on margins. He walked up the sidewalk like he owned the concept of sidewalks. He bent as if to tuck something in the storm door. The camera caught his face and his hand and the cheap envelope. I opened the door before he could retreat to plausible deniability. The chain stayed on because we learn. "Wrong house," I said. He blinked fast, finding a tone. He told me to relax, that he was just dropping a letter. Cash buyer, 7 days. As is, he claimed, helped everybody. "Helps you," I said. "Move along." He smiled the way men do when they're about to teach you the rules they think you forgot. He said I knew how this goes, that sons called him when dads got tired and they helped. "Not tired," I said. Awake. He stepped a fraction closer, not enough to be a threat, just enough to suggest grammar. He suggested I didn't want a sign on my lawn that they could keep it quiet, a pocket listing high, net clean. "Cameras on," I said without raising my voice. "Say hi to the part of the internet that knows what trespass means." He paled a shade. "Whoa, not like that," he said, backing an inch. "We're neighbors." "No," I said. "We live in the same town." He started to speak again. I shut the door gently. The chain fell into its bracket with a sound that felt like a period. Through the glass, I watched him look at his reflection, and then at the camera, and then at his phone, and then at the sidewalk. He left the envelope tucked where he'd begun to tuck it. I let it sit. Hank would want to see it the way a man wants to see a crack before he fills it. I called the non-emergency police line not because I wanted a show, but because I wanted an incident number. The dispatcher took my story like she'd taken 100 that day, asked for the time and the description and whether the man broke anything. He broke the assumption he could, I said. She gave me a number I wrote in the hardback notebook with the confidence of someone collecting facts, not feelings. Night clicked on. Ruth hugged me at the door in a way that honored the chain. She said I was doing it the hard kind. She told me to call her if I needed a scolding or a recipe. I told her I needed both. She smiled down the steps at the maple and said, "It'll hold," as if talking to wood and me. After she left, I answered a text from Nora Hospital flag, still active. "You're popular. Good news, Lauren from Brookside called to check on you and said she canceled per your instruction." She sounded relieved. I wrote back, "Tell Lauren she did good work, and tell yourself the same." At 11, Grace emailed, "FYI, third-party call attempted to confirm change of address. Blocked." Our note held. "Sleep well." I wrote back, "I will." It felt like permission. Midnight came the way it does when you've earned it quietly. The clock in the kitchen ticked each second like a bead on a string. The house knew me again. The whispers I'd heard all day had done what whispers do when faced with paper and presents. They'd turned from rumors into a chorus of small yeses. Yes to the camera. Yes to the deed. Yes to the fund in Ellen's name. Yes to the idea that a man can say "not like this" and mean it without shouting. I walked the rooms one last time the way I do when I want to remember what a place looks like in the dark. The railing Ellen painted caught what little light the porch offered and gave it back thin and honest. The chain on the door was a small line drawn with a steady hand. The envelope Trey left sat on the table with the others, an artifact for the file, not a threat to my breath. At bed, I lay on my side and listened to the house talk to itself. Water heater sighing. Refrigerator taking a breath. Wind inspecting the soffit and deciding it held. My phone lit the ceiling once more with an email glow. Anita draft agreement updated, Ellen Marie Miller Nursing and Health Scholarship Fund. "Ready when you are." I thumbed back. "Ready." I turned the phone face down and let the light go out. Somewhere in another booth at Sal's, a younger man was telling his version of the story to someone who would nod at the right places. Somewhere Gina poured coffee a little too fast because life had taught her to move before feelings made her spill. Somewhere Kara was writing a note in a CRM that said, "Do not contact." And Trey was scowling at a door that did not open for him. And the man at the courthouse parcel office was stamping the notice Samuel drafted, "Notice of trust, no unauthorized transactions," into the record for the next person who thought my life was a thing they could pencil in. The town would keep whispering. That's what towns do. But now the whispers were different. They weren't predictions about a sign on my lawn. They were reports. He's home. He's got help. He's steady. He's setting up a scholarship. And from Mrs. Lance, probably louder than appropriate. If anyone tries to list that house without his say-so, I'll read the bylaws until their ears fall off. I smiled in the dark. Tomorrow would bring something else. The son I raised, maybe, or the boy I let become a man who thinks shortcuts are better paths. Either way, the fence stood, the posts held, the gate was visible, and the map on the kitchen window I traced with my finger 2 nights ago had turned into lines on paper with names and stamps on them. The house didn't promise me safety. It offered me truth. That was enough to sleep on. So I did, with my hand open on the sheet, not clutching, not pointing, just ready to hold what showed up in the morning if it came with its name and its own time.